Ger and Eoin with you every morning from 7:30 all the way through until 10, Monday to Friday. And if you ever want to catch up on any of our stuff, you can get it on youtube.com/offtheball. The best place to watch us and to consume all our content is on offtheball.com. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can WhatsApp us. 087 180 180 is the number, or you can get us on Twitter and Facebook as well. Coming up for you on the show this morning, I'm going to bring you the very latest from Paul Rouse in just a moment. After that, we'll deal with the sports pages from 8:10 all the way through until about 8:30 this morning. Busy morning, lots of different stories. Some news from the GAA, some news from the FAI. We'll get to that just after 8 o'clock. Daniel Harris is going to join us after 8:35 to talk to us about Manchester United's transfer plans and the planned return to action for the Premier League. That's coming your way at around about 8:35. How's the head this morning is Cara Healy, the Laois footballer, and Laois hurler as well. Of course, he's in the papers this morning talking a good bit about the marathon that he's running to raise money. So we'll talk about that in the papers, and we'll also hear about how he's getting on at around about 8:50 this morning. Arthur James O'Dea is going to join us to talk to us about his oral history of the TV ad for Club Energize. It was called Lake. They had a bunch of GAA players literally walk on water to launch the partnership between Club Energize and the GPA, which was a huge moment in Gaelic Games history because it gave the GPA the money and credibility they needed to essentially become the de facto player representative body, and the only one that there could ever be. And there's more news on the GPA in the papers this morning as well. And then Off the Bull is the Last Dance review show with Kieran, Donaghy, Jarlath, Regan, Ronan Mullen and Eoin Sheehan. That's coming your way at 9:15 this morning. In the meantime, though, buckle up because it's the very latest in our History of Sports series with the legend that is Paul Rouse. Have a look.
So Ireland post-famine, as we move into the latter half of the 19th century, where are we in terms of demographics, in terms of daily life? Economically, I presume things are still very poor.
Things are exceptionally poor. You have about 5,000 landlords who own essentially all the land of the country, and you have around them, beneath them, a row of tenant farmers who basically rent the land and are doing their best to survive. And you get repeated waves of emigration through the 50s, 60s, 70s, all the way through the 19th century. The population of Ireland continued to fall. And again, it remains the case that the population of Ireland, uniquely in the Western world, is smaller now than it was in 1850, the only place in the world for which you can say that. And it comes from that emptying of the countryside in the 19th century. Now, the British countryside was also emptying in the 19th century, but they were going to work in the factories of the new conurbations of England. What was happening in Ireland is that the only real industrial conurbation or industrial urban area was Belfast, and the Belfast shipyards and everything that happened and flowed from those and their linen factories. And so you had the population of Belfast was growing during those years, from 15,000 at the beginning of the century to 350,000 at the end of it. So you get a vast explosion of industrialised Belfast with its rows of terrace blocks, a kind of a Coronation Street style development of urban life there. And that was to prove hugely important to the development of sport in Ireland, as we will see. But around that, you do get a general growth of urban areas, of Irish people living in urban areas, to 35%, up from 15 at the beginning of the study. But that's much less than in Britain. And you do get some gains in income as the century goes on, but these are relatively slight. What you do have, though, are technological revolutions which really matter. There were 65 miles of railway in Ireland in 1850. By the time you get to 1900, there are 3,500 miles of railway. So the whole of the island is like a spider's web of rail going around it, bringing people from place to place. And that allows for the creation of a national culture of play. And that really matters because you can go around the island on a given day and go home because of the nature of the train timetable, and allows you to play a game. You can go from Belfast and play in Cork and get home that day, and in a way that you never could previously. So that really matters. There was also a newspaper revolution, which allowed for the coverage of these new games that were played around the place. And people were going to national school, were more literate. 90% of the population were literate by the end of the century. And that really mattered. So that was happening. And so that change in society really mattered. And finally, what also mattered was the divided nature of Irish society, because the idea that putting a parliament in the House of Commons would somehow reach a settlement of the Irish political scene was, of course, a nonsense. There were huge divides along identity lines in Ireland between those who espoused Britishness and those who espoused Irishness. And this really mattered when it came to the construction of the sporting world. Identity politics were remade through sport. And this, of course, led to the idea of, inverted commas, foreign games.
This is probably an impossible question to answer then as we move into the foreign games arriving. Do we have any way of knowing, because I don't suspect we were doing polls back then, if you were to bump into an average person in the street and say, do you want the Brits out of here? Would 99% of Irish people in that second half of the 19th century have said, yes, absolutely?
No, they definitely wouldn't have said yes, absolutely. You had a divided public between people who were, and there is no getting away from the fact that religion, of course, wrapped itself like bindweed around everything that happened in the Irish time. Now, this is a really crude divide, but there was the idea of being Protestant and Unionist and being Catholic and Nationalist. Now, that is way, way too simplistic, and I can't say that clearly enough, but it meant straight away you were talking at a basic million people who were essentially loyalist and British and who gave their allegiance there. So that's your starting point for that divide. In terms of, and that doesn't mean that there weren't Catholics who weren't utterly committed to the British Empire and that there weren't Protestants who believed in an independent Ireland. There were, of course, both of those things. And then when you look at the nationalist community themselves, it was utterly divided between those on the margins who were revolutionaries and believed in the attainment of an independent Ireland through armed struggle. And then there were those in the middle who were nationalists but got on with things. And then there were those on the other side who they would call themselves Irish, but they were wedded to the culture of the British Empire. Okay. And so it's a very divided society, and this really matters when it comes to sport.
Yes, that's very useful to know. So cricket, let's do that as the jumping off point, which, you know, as we've talked about several times before, was incredibly popular, if not the most popular sport for a period in the late 19th century. So cricket then, in light of what you've just said, doesn't necessarily fall along nationalist lines or non-nationalist lines.
No, it absolutely doesn't. So there's the garrison game element of cricket, the fact that there was a cricket pitch laid out at every British barracks in the country, the fact that all the biggest states in the country, or many of the biggest states, had cricket pitches, all of that kind of tells you of a world in which it was a British sport. But there's a really interesting place to start from when it comes to cricket, and it's in a shop on Grafton Street, John Lawrence's shop. Now, John Lawrence opened the shop in the 1860s, and what John Lawrence's shop was basically a sports shop. One of the first in the country. And what he did was he sold sports equipment and sports clothes. And he also published a handbook of cricket in Ireland from 1865 to 1881, 16 editions. And he laid out year after year the spread of cricket across Ireland. So even by 1870, for example, there were 120 cricket clubs in Ireland, one in every county in the country. And the world that he showed was, he was such a clever man. He made a lot of money, at least he made a living out of sport. So he didn't just publish that book, he didn't just sell his sports equipment. He rented out rooms to the sports clubs who didn't have them in Dublin, and thereby drawing them into his shop before they went up to their meetings. He didn't rent them out, he gave them to them for free. But then he used to go around when there were balls on or big sports days going on, and he'd put on fireworks displays for the people who were running the sport. So he would make money through that as well. And if you look at Lawrence's books, you can see through the 1870s the growth in the number of cricket clubs and cricket teams, because there were teams that represented, like News Talk might have a soccer team, but it's not a soccer club. So you might just field the team on an ad hoc basis. So it's not just a club which runs through the year, but it's also groups of people getting together to field teams. So this was happening all the way through the 1870s and it was so big in 1875. The Freeman's Journal, the largest Catholic newspaper in the country, devoted to ideas around Irish nationalism, talked about the spread of cricket, talked about how it was everywhere in the country, and wrote, "We may take it for granted that the youth of this country will establish it permanently." Basically, that cricket was now the game, and it would dominate Ireland, and it was the most played game in Ireland in the 1870s.
So clearly, it's not just people of British extraction who are into it and who like it and enjoy it. It's the most popular game. It's played by everyone.
Lawrence kind of sold his sports stuff as being he kind of, in his ads, he used to say that he used to sell stuff for British sports in Ireland. And that is true. It was a British sport and it was part of the garrison. But if you look at records from the National Folklore Collection in UCD, you say stuff like people like the ordinary Irish-speaking tenant farmers like Johnny Hawk down in Newcastle West, who talk about, he gives this record where he says, we saw the landlords playing it, and we imitated them, and we played the game for ourselves. And all across Ireland, you see ordinary country people from villages who get up their own teams to play the game. And it was a grand way to spend an afternoon.
Trinity College, you wanted to mention?
Oh yeah, you have to talk about Trinity College when it comes to sport. It's a central staging point for the organisation of sport in Ireland because of the people who come through it. Now, Trinity had been founded in 1592, and it's a 25 acre site in the middle of the city. And in the middle of that campus, the Trinity campus, was a 5 acre grassy area, which kind of became an informal home for a variety of sports in the 19th century. And Trinity became a staging point for stuff like athletics, but also for sports like rowing. So rowing, obviously they didn't row on the grass, but the people who were training on the grass came together as Trinity students and founded the Pembroke Row Boat Club. And that then became the Dublin University Boat Club. And the spread of rowing out through organised regattas happened all across Ireland during this years. The idea was you form a club now. And it's not that people started to row against each other and finally said, we'll have races. People had rowed boats against each other in competition for as long as we have a record. But this is organised in clubs for set competitions. But most of all, you see it with Trinity. The cricket pitch was laid out in the 1840s. And then in the 1850s, the first organised football club, the Dublin University Football Club, claiming still to be the oldest rugby club in the world, was established in 1854. And there's a brilliant line. I took an ad out in the Dublin newspapers and said, in the Daily Express, and said, football. A match will be played in College Park today, Saturday, between original and new members of the club. Play will commence at 2:00 college time. So there was a very particular time in Trinity College time, which was 15 minutes behind the rest of Dublin life because students wouldn't come to lectures on time. So they had it at college until 2:00. And week after week, through the 1850s, groups of students came together to play football on that grassy area beside the Nassau Street railings in Dublin, 2 or 3 times a week. They'd have different teams. They would have medics against the rest. They would play fair hair against dark hair, smokers against non-smokers, and so on. And people would gather along the railings to watch this game, this formally organised game by their rules, be played in Trinity College.
Rugby or football?
Football, not rugby, football.
Football.
This is before rugby was not established until 1871 and soccer was not established until 1863. So this is 1854. This is our football club. They're playing their own rules. And so what are those rules? It's not quite clear what those rules are, but who was playing it. There were people there who'd been to secondary schools, some of the elite secondary schools in Ireland, but also in that place were English students who had come over to Ireland to go to Trinity College, and also Trinity College Irish kids, Irish boys who had gone to school in England, who had gone to rugby school and to Cheltenham School and various other schools, and they brought their games at home and they played there. So about 1,000 Irish boys in any given year were in secondary school in England.
Okay. So then from memory last week where we talked about the origins of rugby and soccer, by 1863, I think, was the foundation of the Football Association.
That's right.
And then things progressed. FA Cup blossomed and rugby went and did its own thing. So there was a period in England where, and across Britain, where they had to kind of disentangle what was rugby and what was football from what had been a smattering of people running around in a massive scrum, picking up the ball, hacking each other, kicking the ball on the ground, I'm sure at times as well. So in Ireland, if the FA in England is founded in 1863 and you're saying first rugby club is closer to 1870, do rugby and soccer pretty much at that period arrive fully formed and separated?
No, it didn't happen like that at all. Trinity was the only football club in the city of Dublin and in the country during the 1850s and into the 1860s for a long stretch. And what happened was Trinity just played matches amongst itself, and then as Trinity students went out, they went and played. They founded various clubs in different places. But the club itself in Trinity didn't really prosper until it had to be reorganised in 1867 by Charles Barrington, who took this sport. He said that there are too many Trinity students who are members of the Grafton Street Harriers, who are kind of fond of parading themselves up and down Grafton Street in their fancy clothes and are not interested in sport. So we kind of reorganised the club and remade its rules in the end of the 1860s. But he didn't affiliate it to the Football Association in England, as no club affiliated to the Football Association in England. In fact, the whole way through the 1860s, there was no soccer club in Ireland. You go to 1875, still no club. And then in 1875 to 1878, you get the first pushings of games being played in Ireland, records of them, about the game beginning to press its way. But the initial spread of either soccer or rugby in Ireland was not soccer, it was rugby. Okay. And you got the spread in the late 1860s and through the 1870s of rugby clubs through the place. So North of Ireland, 68, Wanderers, 1869, and Lansdowne in 1872, all of whom give their allegiance ultimately to rugby football. That's the sport that they're interested in. And these are the guys who come together on the 10th of December. There's only a smattering of clubs. There's not much more than a dozen football clubs in the country in 1874. And they came together to establish the Irish Football Union. And by that, they meant the Irish Rugby Football Union. Okay. But the 1874, 10th of December, in rooms in Trinity College is where the Irish Football Union was established. And they were established for the express purpose of picking a team to play an international match against the rugby players of England.
What about the first soccer clubs?
That's later. So before we get there, we have to talk about what happened with rugby in those times, because in establishing this international team, it was done so on the idea that it would foster mutual respect and toleration between people. I'm not too sure that international sport has actually managed to do that. It seems to me to be as likely to create bitterness, divide, and reinforce stereotypes as it does to create kind of any kind of feelings of toleration. Particularly because they couldn't even manage in Ireland to keep mutual respect and toleration. There was a split immediately. The Belfast and northern-based clubs decided that they would have no part of this idea. These usurpers from Trinity who were taking control, and they founded their own Northern Football Union because they argued that Belfast people weren't being properly represented in the Irish team. So between 1874 and 1879, the Irish Football Union had two unions. There was the Northern Football Union and the Irish Football Union. They came together to pick a team every year, and they finally joined together under the modern structure of the Irish Rugby Football Union in 1879 with its provincial branch system. So it gave autonomy to the people in Ulster to run things as they were. They essentially neglected Connacht, and for many years it was Ulster and Leinster who dominated rugby in the country.
Okay, so soccer then?
Soccer. Okay, so soccer it's interesting what happened with soccer, because it used to always be said that soccer was brought into Ireland by J.A. McCleary, who is a Belfast draper, who was on his honeymoon in Scotland, where he saw the spread of soccer was going wild at the time, and he thought, I'm going to bring some of that home. Not alone was he going to bring teams over, but he would charge people in. He saw people coming in huge numbers to watch Scottish soccer. So the view was that he'd rented this ground in Belfast, and that he had brought Queen's Park and Caledonian over on the 24th of October 1879, charged people in, made a whole load of money. And from this, Cliftonville Club was established in 1879, and which McCleary was involved in, and then the Irish Football Association in 1880. So there are bits of that story that are true. But and when I say, by the way, people used to believe this, that was a story that I also used to think was the truth. But it has been blown out of the water by a historian from the North called Martin Moore, who published an article a couple of years ago in an international sports journal, in which he showed that McCleary had utterly exaggerated his own role in it, that the whole story came from a letter which McAleary had actually written himself in the middle of 1880s, claiming that he was the one who established it. His actual line was, "Alone I did it," which is not true at all. There were other people such as J.A. Allen which were involved. So it is true that a match was played on the 24th of October 1878. It is true that it was an important staging point. But what Martin Moore has showed is that from at least 1875, there were also games being played in places like the Ulster Cricket Club, where players were playing a variation of soccer in the middle of the 1870s. Similarly, Windsor Football Club had played a match in the 1870s, and David Toms has shown how a similar thing happened in Mallow School in 1877. So games were being played on an informal basis around soccer rules in the country. What there hadn't been, though, was the formation of soccer clubs until 1879, which began with Cliftonville.
Okay.
And this is where Belfast really mattered. The fact that Belfast was a northern industrial town really mattered, because it was in Belfast that soccer spread, and spread hugely. There were huge numbers of people from Scotland and from the north of England, less or so, working in Belfast, skilled labourers who were working in the shipyards and in all the ancillary industries around the shipyards. So they recreated over the next couple of years that soccer culture from their home place in the urban streets of Belfast. And if you look at it, in November 1880, when the Football Association was founded, the Irish Football Association, it was founded by 5 Belfast clubs and 2 more from Derry. So that tells you that this was a North of Ireland initiative. And by the way, people said when they saw that first soccer match in 1878, there was a brilliant report from a local newspaper, or from a national newspaper, which said that this will never take off. It said there's just players running around butting at the ball like a pack of young goats, and that to train a soccer player, you basically would need a ballet teacher to get them fully in kit, and that there was no way that Irish people who like manly competition would take the soccer. Entirely wrong, as prediction. But what happened then was the game spread all across Belfast and out into those kind of satellite towns of Belfast. And for the first years, it's the IFA Cup, which was established during that time in 1880 and played in 1881. It's around Belfast that the dominant teams were all based.
This is such an exciting period, obviously, in that, you know, all the rugby clubs and football clubs, so many of them that are still in existence and big names today, are founded around this time. And when you look at the Premier League clubs, and that extends to here as well. So away from soccer and rugby spreading over, there's also an explosion in terms of things, the other English games. So I suppose things like golf and things like tennis, all of that is starting to really blossom here.
It's all taken off during these 1870s and the 1880s. And it's amazing the way society works. So the first sports club in Ireland, as we were talking about before, was founded in 1720. It was the Yacht Club. There was hunting and horse racing clubs in the 1850s, or in the 1750s and 1770s and so on. But the full democratization of club-based sport only really happened in Ireland in the 1870s and the 1880s. That's when it all becomes, it basically is an explosion in how society is organized in terms of what people do for recreation. And look at, we won't stick with soccer, but by 1910, there were 420 soccer clubs in Ireland. That's soccer alone. All around the place, there was more than 100 tennis clubs. And that really matters. Tennis pushed in the 1870s. Lawn tennis, modern lawn tennis, was invented in England in 1873, more or less, and became a Wimbledon championship. It became a game of the elite, where lawn tennis nets were put out on country estates. But it was imitated by the sprawling middle classes who recreated in the suburbs what they wished to see, what they wished to be part of. It was a real kind of case of middle class aspiration, but also middle class exclusion and upper middle class exclusion and elite exclusion. A great example is Enniscorthy Lawn Tennis Club, founded in 1890 and restricted to the professional elite of the town. And they had basically a blackballing voting system if you wanted to join the club. So I'm in the town, I work in the bank, I wish to join, and I put my name forward. I must get 2 seconders. I go in, there's a vote, and they actually use these black balls, and you drop them in. You get 3 black balls from 3 people in the town who don't like you, who are members of that club, and you don't get in. And there are brilliant exchanges of correspondence around people who say that their reputations have been destroyed by the fact that they were blackballed by entry into a sporting club. So it became a kind of a real See, it's one of those things about sport, about the idea of sport for all. Yes, to a point, but it's also a vehicle for display of wealth and display of exclusivity, and to say, I'm part of this culture, I'm part of this society, and you're not. And so it's a complicated story in terms of this spread. So but you still get the spread of a game which is imitated even outside of clubs. Okay.
So as we begin to fight the clock and draw towards the end of week 5, the elephant in the room here is 1884 in the GAA.
1884 in the GAA. An incredible amount of things happened in 1884 in Ireland in sporting terms. And it happened in, like, even in rugby, the foundation of rugby as a working class game in Limerick happened in 1884 and flowed out from the establishment of Ger and Eoin Rugby Club. But the great signal moment in the reordering of Irish sport, a moment which turned Irish sport on its head, took place on the 1st of November 1884 in Hayes' Hotel in Thurles, when Maurice Davin and Michael Cusack established the Gaelic Athletic Association. And they created something which has enormous influence on how we all engage with sport in this country. Whether you love the GAA or you're not involved in the GAA, there is no denying its relevance to what happens around the country. Now, it's really interesting. It's often posited that the GAA because of the nature of its founding, brought a political dimension to Irish sport. And that's true only to a point, because that political dimension was already there.
Sure.
The sports which were already in place, they flew the Union Jack. They had as the patron the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. They had British marching bands there. They were part of the wider empire-related nature of sport. That doesn't mean that everybody who played those sports, or even most people who played those sports, bought into that imagery. It just acknowledges that imagery existed. And what the GAA did was, through Michael Cusack, to use his line, we've created an opportunity now for you to choose. You can choose British sports or you can choose Irish sports. Now, the fact is that they invented a game called Gaelic football, as we'll discuss next week, and they remade hurling. They didn't bring it back, a game that was lost. Again, hurling had never been lost. They had modernised it, and they took control of Irish athletics. And I suppose it is one of the great, little remembered facts that it was athletics which was the dominant sport within the GAA in its first year.
We'll pick up on all those points next week. For the time being, Paul Rouse, Professor at UCD School of History. Thanks very much, Paul.
Thanks a million, Joe.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
They spoke about your arm not being down beside your side. I mean, this is not Irish dancing.
OTB Sports Radio.
Basketball would have been my main game.
The brand new sports radio station from Off the Ball.
That's my point. Don't play for us if you're a proud Englishman.
Now broadcasting 24 hours a day. Live on the Go Loud app, Alexa.
You have a whole new world of possibilities.
Google Home, tune in, and offtheball.com/radio.
This is OTB Sports Radio. OTB AM.
Yeah, you're very welcome along to OTB AM. We're with you every morning from 7:30 until 10. If you've just joined us, you've missed a great half hour in the company of Paul Rouse, which is available for download on all of our podcasts. You can get it on the OTB Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcast. Best place, obviously, offtheball.com. Eoin Sheehan, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Very well, Ger. What's the crack?
It's busy out morning. There's plenty going on. Plenty of people out talking about stuff and trying to capture where we're going next in all of this, and when we might have some return to play. Yesterday was like, return to play. We've got ideas. This is what's going to happen. And today is the backlash against that. And tomorrow there'll be the backlash against the backlash. And so the cycle continues.
I wonder if the response from Irish and British sporting bodies is going to be as widely differing as the Irish and British government response to COVID-19 in the first place.
Go on.
Well, I know we're not comparing like when we're comparing the GAA with the financial behemoth that is the Premier League, but it is quite interesting when you look at, say, the back page of the Irish Examiner this morning and compare that with the back page of the Guardian this morning, where the UK government is aiming to have football up and running, and then in Ireland we have John Horan absolutely abhorred by the idea that there were plans afoot or rumours of plans afoot to actually get football and hurling back underway.
All of this is guesswork, but it seems as if there were some kind of conversations happening at government level in a government department, potentially in a room with two people going, geez, I wonder how that might work. And then that became a memo, which became something, which became a briefing, which became a story. And nobody at any point kind of rang up the GA and said, here lads, we're having a few ideas. Do you want to knock heads on it? And you can see how as an organisation, if you're being spoken about but not involved in those conversations, there might be some reticence to accept what is being said, particularly when it doesn't actually have a core plan in place first, and it doesn't have any of the caveats that you would have. Let's assume everything is okay, and then this is how we're going to gradually get back to action, as opposed to the government demanding the GAA test all its inter-county players and cocoon them away, and because that was obviously never going to make any sense.
No, it wasn't. Like I find it interesting as well. Like I think, for the record, by the way, I think that John Horan is right to be coming out and putting his foot down and saying that we're not going to go back until the government says it's safe to do so, and that people perhaps were getting a bit carried away with themselves. I'm just kind of commenting on how interesting the comparison is with the UK. But what I found very interesting was that Horan committed to the fact that the club game is far more likely to come back, that the priority will be on the club game, and that there will be a return to club action before inter-county action, which it's a fairly big commitment from the president of the organisation, given, like, I know without packed stadiums, of course, the inter-county game is not as lucrative, but there is still television money, there is still some financial positives to be taken from the inter-county game coming back first. I'm not saying it should come back first, but I'm just saying that if you're running an organisation, it's a big commitment to say that the club game is going to be the first one back.
It just feels like that's again, everything is going to be a graduated return, right? No matter what happens, even if there was a vaccine, everybody won't get the vaccine. Like, there won't be enough for the whole world to get it in the first 6 weeks. Like, even if there is an antiviral treatment, then it's going to take a long time for the specific elements of that to be made available to the public. And at what point do we get it in Ireland, and how do you prioritise who gets it? Well, obviously healthcare workers get it first and the vulnerable get it. So we're miles and miles and miles away from that being widely available. Like, local sports action is going to be the first thing to return. So you're coming back that way. The top-down approach is only possible. It's going to be possible in the NBA, for example, where you've got very small playing squads. That's the most viable international league at the moment, it would seem to me. There's talk about Formula One perhaps having races behind closed doors, but like, how do the pit crew all work together? Like, I suppose they're dressed in the equivalent of hazmat suits and they could all have oxygen. But the notion that we were going to catapult inter-county first before everything else, it's a dream. Obviously, it would be amazing if we could get inter-county back under strict protocols so that we would have stuff to look at. But like, from a health and well-being thing, it was always going to be the club, small units progressing to a point where they were able to play. And if you go back to the conversation we had with Luke O'Neill, I know I keep bringing this back up, but like, he's talking about small groups and under 30s perhaps being first back. Like, that's miles and miles away from having club championships or any of that kind of stuff, or club league games that everybody's going to accept in terms of standings. Can you be relegated if you lose a series of league games when, somebody in the vicinity catches coronavirus and all of a sudden fixtures get scrubbed? Like, are we going back to a point where all sport is essentially for participation, and the whole notion of knockout and it counting for things? Like, is that the direction we're heading?
I don't know. Like, I think Oren touched on the point about community being the priority, and that getting the biggest positives for your community back first is the main reason why club will come back first. I think that the belief that inter-county might be the first one to come back was obviously based on the view from abroad, which is seeing the big leagues, as you mentioned, the NBA, the Premier League, Bundesliga, all making moves to actually come back. But in reality, it's not comparable whatsoever. And Horan did rule that out yesterday, in fairness, saying that cocooning players just won't be an option. They'll have to go back to their families. They'll have to go back to their workplace, and they just can't put any of those players away for a while. So it's not going to be a top-down approach as it is in the UK, for example, and that's where the big difference is. I think it's just the fact that it's an amateur game. If these were fully paid professionals, it could be a different situation. And you'd wonder then, like if you look at other sports, if you look at, say, perhaps how Leinster and Munster and Connacht and Ulster might actually come back to play, perhaps that is a top-down approach rather than looking at amateur rugby in this country. Yeah, so what do you think might happen there? What conversations do you imagine are happening around rugby? Well, it's the same conversations they're having in the Premier League, I presume. That how do we actually create a safe situation for matches to take place once there is an ability to realise that the health service isn't under as much pressure as it might have been at one stage this year, when we can actually have emergency services at games. And basically, I would say that once a league around one league around Europe comes back and has pulled it off after a couple of weeks, there might be a little bit of a ripple effect. Like perhaps rugby is a very different situation because of the nature of the game, and it's the ultimate contact sport. And as you say, Formula One, golf might actually have a better chance. But like I still don't even know with some of those, with the contact hours you'd have away from the sport itself. So I don't know, it definitely has a better chance than GAA of coming back quicker, because you can just put these professionals into a specially designated hotel for a little while because it is their job. Yeah, and like how difficult or otherwise that might be, they can negotiate and navigate that a little bit down the line. So just to talk about rugby, right, for the sake of idle speculation of a Tuesday morning at 8:10, the scrum happens, right, and somebody in one scrum, it turns out, is a carrier but is asymptomatic, and the next week the entire scrum has it. Like, what happens in that circumstance where you've decided that you're going to restart a competition but suddenly an entire forward pack is laid low? Like, what happens next? Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? It's a kind of a shutdown situation, is it not? It's like, we've screwed up here. This was a risk that we knew was going to happen, that if one person contracts it, it just sets the whole thing back. Like I know that if you want to bring up various scientific theories, that is a situation where that is why you're putting sport back first, is because these are young, healthy individuals who might be able to withstand such a thing. But I would have thought that it's the possibility of a second wave is just such a huge thing. Like you even had Michal Briody coming out yesterday talking about his business engagements in Singapore, I think it is, and how that he's seeing his business dealings in Far East Asia actually kind of peak and trough, because there could be the risk of a second outbreak and recurring cases. So, like, it's a shutdown case, isn't it? Are you suggesting something else? I don't know. I mean, I wonder, do all the rugby teams have enough players to have an A team and a B team, or a mixture of, like, so this group of players, if they become infected, will never meet this group of players, but this group of players will have to kind of try and remain, and so that only works if Team A gets impacted and Team B doesn't. But there's nothing to stop Team B getting impacted through community transmission, so Leinster obviously have a big enough squad to do that, and probably the Irish provinces do it. Well, Connacht, after all of their injuries last year, may suddenly have enough players who ended up with enough experience. But like, it's not a straightforward path. And maybe, I don't know, maybe the point about these professional sports is that at some point they're going to seek to have all of their players get the antibodies. And again, we don't even know scientifically that that's going to be the thing that prevents people from getting reinfected. So it's a fairly tricky thing for sports to work out. Extremely tricky. Like, I don't think there's any easy solution here. Like, even the possibility of that happening in the Premier League, like, that is, that's a remarkable tightrope to be walking, isn't it? That's if their agreement is that if we have one outbreak, the whole thing shuts down.
But
then,
maybe
like,
you don't shut it down if there's an outbreak. Maybe you just live, like, so sport is going to have to coexist and teams are going to have to fulfill fixtures with youth players or younger players or reserve team players or whatever it is. Like the whole point of having that under-23 league, like, you know, it's totally, obviously, totally different for professional sport, and it's kind of even graduated depending on the size of the league and the size of the teams and the size of the money that is involved in the clubs. Are the players going to be happy going out and playing against opposition knowing that there's a possibility they're going to end up getting coronavirus? Unlikely, right?
Like I really think that there is, in all of these situations, for now, like we're not talking about 1 year down the line when we have more scientific evidence. Like, as you say, there are certain up in the air theories about antibodies, for example. Like, do we just proceed as if some of the theories are kind of fully proven? Like, I don't know. I would have thought that as a situation that if there is one outbreak, it's done. Like, it's curtains on the league. And if the Premier League, as it's been said in the UK government over the last couple of days, if it is their aim to get back quickly, like, even if it's in a month, 2 months' time, even at that point, you'd have to suspect that it's one case and the whole thing is shut down. There's no way the health services in Ireland and the UK could possibly be in a situation where it's like, yeah, we can take this risk.
So the risk of somebody getting the virus or somebody being seriously ill, somebody dying from the virus, is that?
But somebody getting the virus and that trying to limit any sort of contact and trying to limit the spread of the virus is still a huge priority for the health services. It is now. Like, there's no suggestion that it won't be a huge priority in a month's time. There won't be a suggestion that it won't be a huge priority in 2 months' time. Like, what you're saying is that there could be scientific evidence that it might not actually be as big a concern for a certain demographic of the population in a period of time. I just suspect that period of time won't have elapsed in 1 or 2 months, which means the initial start of the Premier League, as is being proposed for June or for July, if we just say July for now, I just still think that comes with the caveat that if you have one case, it just shuts the whole thing down. Does it not? Like, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure if that's an achievable scientific outlook by July.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. And I wonder if everybody signs up on the basis that these are the risks. You know what the risks are. For the Premier League, obviously, we're talking here, not GAA, but that everybody goes, well, you're not going to get paid, we're not going to get paid. The whole thing, these clubs are going to disappear. This sport disappears if we don't get something up and running. And do you sign away the waiver that goes, yeah, okay, I understand the risks? Like, I don't know. And I don't know what kind of a choice or a decision gets made and how people step in to kind of guarantee that, okay, we're going to protect the sport because these are important institutions. We'll talk about that again a little bit later on. 13 minutes past 8. Here's the sports news for now. The FAI will not be receiving €4.3 million that will be distributed by UEFA to member associations during the pandemic. The €236 million is being made available without conditions to cover essential costs. The money comes from UEFA's hat-trick programme, but the FAI were already advanced the funds for this programme earlier than usual back in 2018. Spurs players will be allowed access to the club's training complex in Enfield in London from today, so hopefully that's the end of the Spurs Covidiot stories of them training out in various parks. Only one player will be allowed on a pitch at any one time, with a restricted number allowed to conduct running sessions each day. Several Spurs players, along with Jose Mourinho, had to be reminded of their social distancing duties over the past month. Arsenal, Brighton and West Ham have also made their training grounds available in limited circumstances. Belgian clubs have postponed a vote deciding on whether or not to end their season prematurely. Bruges look set to be crowned champions after the Pro League's board of directors proposed an early finish, but the clubs will now meet next Monday as they await further clarity from the Belgian government. Dutch officials have called an early halt to their season last Friday, which has led to threats of legal action from various clubs. In rugby, Stuart Lancaster has warned that baby steps are required as rugby officials implement a return plan. It's unlikely any games will be played until late summer at the earliest. The Leinster senior coach says player welfare needs to be the priority as various bodies begin redrawing the fixture calendar. We're going to get into that in the papers as well, what the back-to-back GAA seasons might look like. Sports pages coming your way right now. And Daniel Harris is going to join us to talk to us about Manchester United's transfer off-season, what a redrafted Man United might look like next year. How's the head this today is Cara Healy from Laois. Lake, we're talking about the brilliant GPA Club Energise ad that revolutionised how people thought about GAA players from Arthur James O'Dea has done an oral history of that. And off the ball, the Rodman special. Was it 2 episodes of Rodman? Was it 1 episode of Rodman?
Yeah, he was fairly prevalent in both episodes. Yeah, it's a lot of that, a lot of Pistons, and a lot of Phil Jackson.
Okay, so that's the weekly review that we're doing every Monday night / Tuesday morning. Goes out on OTB AM with Jarlath, Regan, Kieran, Donaghy, Ronan Mullen and Eoin. Now though, time for the sports pages.
OTB AM.
So we're obviously going to start with offtheball.com. Belgian clubs postpone vote that could end season early. I guess there's no real rush at this point. So they're going to wait until Bank Holiday Monday, next Monday, to have that meeting. People are very nervous. SIBO on lockdown in Paris. There's hardly a club in the world that makes money. This is Matt Williams talking about World Rugby and how basically screwed the entire industry is because it's been badly organised and badly run from the start. Spurs to allow players limited access to training complex. We just covered that story. And history shouldn't be a sanitised fable of a nation's glories. More brilliance from Paul Rouse, as you might have seen if you joined us from 7:30 this morning. But that full lecture series is going to make for compelling viewing and a real education for all of us. An opportunity to access the inner workings of one of the great minds of Irish sports history. What's next with you, Eoin?
The Irish Independent leads with a photograph of a few dejected Republic of Ireland players. UEFA's €4.3 million advanced payment that is already spent. So Ireland are going to be precluded from the fund that is going to come from the UEFA kitty. There'll be a cash injection for most football associations around the continent, but not Ireland. They've already got that money. They've already spent that money for fairly obvious reasons. GPA to reduce financial demands on GEA as world has changed, writes Donaghy Boyle. This is Kieran, the GPA's head of finance, who has admitted the world has changed with regards to ongoing funding negotiations with the GEA, which might suggest that they won't be looking for as big an amount of cash as they usually look for at the end of the season, or on at least a 1-year term. It might come out from the GPA at least. Elsewhere in the Irish Independent, you've got Stuart Lancaster of Leinster, saying he would relish Lions' tour of duty. He says he sees a lot of hurdles to overcome before games return as well. No stopping Cotter after finding her way on road to Rouen, and 2 into 1 may become a reality for GEA. That's Cullen Keyes on the possibility of 2 championships in 1 year.
The Irish Times there this morning is FAI cashed UEFA payment in 2018. It's a very spare headline, and it's loads of money coming. Oh, balls, we already spent it. And then Lancaster says Leinster will keep ahead of the curve. And F1 plans to start season in July with Austria doubleheader. So doubleheader Grand Prix. I mean, if you've got a venue that can take a Grand Prix, why not have doubleheaders? It just strikes me that they'd be very similar, wouldn't they? Is that not? Is the whole point about the tracks moving? Not that it's going to be different this week from next week. Are you not going to get exactly the same results essentially if you do the same Grand Prix twice?
Well, yeah. Well, I would assume so. Unless, you could. I don't know how you I kind of had in my head when I saw that Formula 1 was going to come back. It's just going to be Monaco will become Formula 1 world forever, and they will just have.
Good idea.
If we're going to lock down hotels for Premier League stars, they can definitely lock down Monaco
and the boats.
It's basically already on lockdown anyway. It's already its little secluded place. So
they all live there.
They all live there, and just crack on with that. They could share cars. For the greater good. It could be Lewis Hamilton in a non-Mercedes car for one race, Mercedes for one race. Actually, let's determine who is the pound-for-pound best driver in Formula 1. That could be something they could do.
Good idea. What's next?
But it's obviously not going to happen. Back page of the Herald is UEFA cash spent. FAI won't get €4.3 million as money was already drawn down. And the same story there as well from the GPA. The world has changed, says GPA chief Barr. And then also greatest Dublin sporting events today, number 9, the 1998 international rules. And then they're on to number 8 tomorrow. I don't remember the 1998 international rules.
I'm stunned that anybody anywhere has put an international rules game on any top 10 list.
05 in fairness was 05, wasn't it? The one with the
if you want a box, say one a box from a box.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good shout, the international rules, but I don't recall 98 myself, so I'm sure it's deserving of its place.
It's very brave. The Here is the Examiner for you this morning. GAA and DTS chiefs fume over claim players will get priority testing. And I was like, DTTS. Okay, it is the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport. It trips off the tongue. Leading officials within the GAA and the department are irate at the solo run, which gave the impression the testing of inter-county players would be prioritised so as to facilitate a return to training. Speculation across the weekend that the DTTS was considering the establishment of a player-focused COVID-19 testing regime to enable the resumption of inter-county activity was yesterday described as irresponsible and a nothing story by the GAA president, John Horan. So that was an angry backlash against that. And they also have Mark Brenny has shelved his retirement plans. That is an unspoken about aspect of all this so far, that everybody's getting a year of rest in the legs that have a lot of miles on the clock. And teams who have been to the well many times and other such cliches are now getting an opportunity for their bodies to heal. And out of the loop, GAA know the true value of games. That's John Fogarty's piece there today. So we'll come back and talk about some of those stories in a moment.
The Irish Mirror this morning leads with the third degree. Rio queries Ace Pogba's dedication and tells him to be honest with fans. It's a train wreck. Meanwhile, GAA chief aghast over comeback claims. There's a new bidder who's entered the race to take over Newcastle. Of
course there is. At the last minute. There always is.
There always is. The FAI miss out on virus aid, and Premier Chief, are we jumping gun? Which is a question we actually don't seem to have been asked too much in the Premier League at the moment. It is, how do we do this? Not, can we do this?
Emiliano Martinez returning to training. The pictures of all the cars, the players all seem to like Ferraris, it turns out. Sure, why wouldn't you? If you could have one, you would, wouldn't you? The Daily Star this morning, Blank of Ireland, great headline. No new money to ease FAI's cash troubles. The FAI won't see a cent of the near 5 million promised by FIFA and UEFA in the last few days. UEFA yesterday announced the release of a whopping 236 million. Obviously, this is the hat-trick money. We're becoming very familiar with these different terms and the little pockets of cash that were coming the way of the administration. But unfortunately, we've already cashed that cheque. We drew it down. And as for the 462 grand the FIFA announced it would dish out to its members' associations last week, one insider last night said, that's not new money. There is nothing extra for the FAI. So what looked like positive stories certainly have proven not to be. And a picture of Underso at the top there before being sent to France to retire, and GAA county return and no. And Ray Houghton thinks that the Liverpool players will want to win the league season on the field of play. And of course he's right.
The Irish Sun this morning leads with a story about Declan Rice. All hands on deck. Big boys circle for £70 million Rice. Nobody safe in hammer sale. Arsenal, Manchester City and Chelsea thought to be the clubs circling around for Declan Rice at the moment. Formula One chiefs say we want Lou back for good. That is a story you've already mentioned with regards to Formula One. And Premier League has 4 weeks to produce its plan for a return to play, with a picture there of Alexander Seferin. And so a month basically for the Premier League to get its house in order. It's a bit of pressure, is it not, that organisations have a deadline to meet to actually try and get back onto the field of play. But it seems that obviously the Premier League clubs want to do so for themselves anyway, as much as for UEFA reasons, given the financial windfall it'll give them. Yeah,
well, I think putting those deadlines in place will actually make everybody deal with the reality. It's either going to come back and here's our plan, or it's not going to come back, and then we're into the legal issues around finishing a season prematurely and who gets the trophy and how does that work and what about relegation and promotion. So the Daily Mail, back page, Warren Call. Warren Ball is the pun. Lancaster is open to joining Lions setup. A question yesterday at the press conference where he was like, yeah, of course, who wouldn't want to join the Lions? Arsenal motor back to training again. A lot of photographers sleazing over young men in their fancy cars. And GAA chief calls training claims irresponsible. So this is John Horan's piece yesterday where he was saying that it was a story on a podcast from RTE apparently where this idea was concocted, so it obviously ran and ended up being what the GAA think is complete nonsense.
The UK Independent this morning leads to that Formula One story. Silverstone, no fans permitted at British Grand Prix. Silverstone owners have confirmed that July's British Grand Prix will not take place in front of fans, as under normal conditions is not possible. And Miguel Delaney writing that football steps up plans for June restart. Premier League clubs have drawn up plans for a more formalised return to training and matches as confidence grows that football can come back by the middle of June.
The Telegraph. Medical experts call for spitting ban. I agree. Wouldn't it be great if at the end of this there was a few things that we all changed? No spitting on the streets. No spitting. Just no spitting generally. Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, yeah, no spitting on the street is the next step. Is it easier to implement in that sense? No spitting on the street is obviously a stupid thing, and that should not be acceptable in any walk of life.
Straight yellow card, immediate yellow card if you're seen spitting, and we'll make it reviewable by Hawkeye or whatever VAR, and anybody caught spitting, straight yellow, straight away, or straight red. Screw that, straight red. It's a risk of life or death. We don't need your spit. Keep your spit to yourself, you scumbag. Keep that phlegmy mucus in your mouth. We don't need to see it or slip on it or for it to land on somebody. Your COVID-infested spit flecking away there. Blech. No thanks. Yellow card, red card. Red card. Give it a red card.
What if the team is out of players because
they all spat?
Yeah, and people on COVID-19 restrictions. This is the worst time to be precluding players from sport of any kind. As you mentioned yourself, the under-14s are going to get a call up at this stage to actually play games. Increasing punishment for things. This is not the time to do so, but I agree with you in a general sense. But wait till 2022 to start implementing it.
No, this is a life or death matter that I will not hear any counter arguments.
Everything should be allowed at this point. Everything should, studs up 2-footed tackles should be allowed. Handballs should be allowed. We need as many players on the pitch as possible because they could start chopping like flies.
Studs up 2-footed tackles is going to end up with people being a drain on our health system because they have to go to hospital and get done.
X-rays.
Operations. I got distracted by the front cover of the business section of the Telegraph is a picture of Diego Armando Maradona, and it's his tattoo, but it's the cigar that he's smoking that's actually the story. Imperial Brands' dividend remains under threat despite the company offloading its hand-rolled cigar operations for $1.1 billion. Analysts have warned Imperial said the sale, which includes brands such as Cohiba, enjoyed over the years by the likes of Diego Maradona, which two privately owned consortia would be used to pay down debts. So Maradona, Che Guevara, a boat and the Argentine flag and the Cohiba worth £1 billion. Hand-rolled cigars, just one brand worth $1 billion. Happy days for cigar makers. And then medical experts call for spitting ban. We did that one, sorry. So government aims to have football up and running. And the other thing is the men of a certain age have hankies.
Yeah.
Come on. Seriously. It was always a bad idea. But right now, and then you put it back in your pocket and then it sits there and congeals or cooks in the little petri dish of your pocket for an hour and a half. And then you take it out again and you put it back. Come on. It was never, ever, ever a good idea. But right now, you should be in prison for that. That's all I'm saying. Just for a couple of weeks, just until you calm down and you see sense. It's a couple of weeks of prison and no spitting, no men's hankies. Enough.
Touch of class, though.
No, it's not. It's like a little disease, a little factory of disease, a little factory of sadness in your pocket.
You're putting your own and your family's life at threat by having a handkerchief. But don't forget how classy you look.
If you put it in your pocket and never use it, fair enough. But you don't look classy pulling out an encrusted piece of old cloth, do you? Do you think that's classy?
I've obviously got a lower threshold of what class represents than you do. I think it speaks to an old-fashioned way of thinking, I guess. Ban handkerchiefs, ban spitting. This has been a rather productive morning.
We're there. I'm finished. I'm out the door now. Mic drop. We're gone. The world is fixed. Away we go.
Great. Let's get everything back. Actually, I'm looking forward to this weekend's first round of the Ulster Championship. At the back page of The Guardian is a photograph of Nadia Nadim, the Paris Saint-Germain footballer. She's been speaking to Donald McRae. After the game, I helped with kidney surgery, from refugee to PSG, and now training to be a surgeon. Also, football to restart as soon as possible, says Minister in the UK, and F1 to bankroll British Grand Prix so race can go on without fans. There's also a bit of fallout from the Netherlands' decision to end their domestic league. I'm still angry. Lessons from the Netherlands about anguish of a void season. And Jonathan Liu has been writing about why the future of rugby league means so much more than sport.
And the last one for now is the Irish News, and it is Ulster Council aren't expecting provincial senior football championship before November, which is interesting. And talk continue on Premier League resumption. So the Ulster Council aren't expecting a provincial football championship before November. When you think about this, right, and you think about what was said in terms of what Alan Milton said on this show a couple of weeks ago at this point, and what John Horan said yesterday was that they would look at whatever was required. So they want to finish the league because there's 2 rounds of league games left, and it would be a perfect way for everybody to tune up for whatever championship is coming next. Let's assume that it's safe to play, right? Let's assume that it's safe to have enough people in a changing room, and all that kind of stuff is grand. It may be November. It's interesting that they don't think there's going to be any Ulster Championship until November. Do you scrap the provincial championships this year and just have a March Madness style 33 teams, 32 teams, and is it 33 with America? It is, isn't it? So there's no Kilkenny in London, and you've got so it's 33 teams, which is a bit tricky. Or do you keep the provincial and just have straight knockouts from after the provincial, so it's provincials and straight to All-Ireland semi-finals? Or is March Madness not a slightly better idea of, 1 week it's 32 teams, the next week it's 16, the next week it's 8, the next week it's 4, and everybody's on exactly the same curve?
Yeah, like when are you thinking, when is this going to run? And like, are we waiting for all the counties to have their club action done? Because this is if we're talking about the sort of thing, and I'm all for being fanciful about our notions for this year because it's the thing that keeps us going. But we now know from yesterday's comments that there will be club action before county action. So what are we doing? Are we taking a break from the club action to play this?
Well, so what club action will there be? So are we just?
So I don't know. I'm looking at what John Horan said yesterday.
Yeah, but he didn't specify that everybody would be allowed to run off their championship and they'd have like 10 weeks to do so. It was like, let's get the clubs up and running and let's everybody play. And maybe we have a weird scenario where those club games are just about people getting together and playing sport, as opposed to it being a life or death, my club versus your club, Shelbyville versus whatever, Springfield, and we're going to kill each other, and it's the most important thing that's ever happened. Maybe it's just like we actually get to play a game, and so promotion and relegation is less important, and maybe our best players can also maybe focus for this week and next week until they get knocked out on intercounty action. Is there any wiggle room here where like it's safe to do so? The first 2 rounds of the league are played as pre-season essentially, and then you just have a March Madness whatever month that is. So if that's November, if that's December, if that's January, if that's February, and at the end of it you do hand out Sam Maguire and Lee McCarthy.
Well, all the counties would need to implement a March Madness style championship within their own counties as well. You need to kind of pass legislation that every game needs to be knocked out in the GEA from here on out if there is going to be any game in the year 2020. And then that way you could have your tune-up with your club and then go straight into intercounty around Christmas time or start of December or whatever. So
or January, February next year.
Or January, February next year. Like, if that's the like, is that a better alternative than playing next year's league? I think you could do it just before next year's league, which could be a possibility for sure. I think that it's going to be straight knockout, obviously, if we have anything. And I like that idea as well, because like as well, if you have that situation and your first round 16 counties are knocked out, that is 16 championships or county leagues that are freed up.
Yeah,
and there's no need for because you can go straight back. There shouldn't be any situation where county players will need a week or two off to go on the lash or actually recuperate. Like they can go on the lash in their house now and drink their 6 packs or whatever all they want, but later on in the season it'll be such a condensed thing that actually they could just go straight back into the club scene.
Yeah, but it's like it's like the scene in the Shawshank Redemption where he wades out of the mile of shit and comes through clean the other side. Like everybody will be, I'm playing a game and I'm going to play another game, and the week after that I'm going to play another game, and if you can get me a midweek game I'm going to play that game too, because we haven't had any games in like almost a year at that point.
I was trying to think more about your proposal yesterday about kind of amalgamated teams.
Yeah.
And like how that forms. Like, is there I don't know. Is there something where it's like backs up against a wall, 2 captains, 4 captains, whatever, and it's like the NBA All-Star game where you have teams picking? Like it's
I like the sound of that.
Like your idea is obviously something that gets you thinking, and it's a cool idea that you would like to see happen. And just for the purposes of the conversation, you would like to say that actually, of course, there's intercounty or competitive club, you would obviously prioritise that first. But I don't know, is there something that if the GEA finds himself in a situation where competitive sport is acceptable come the start of December, and it's like, oh, we've got 3-4 weeks to actually do something with our calendar. Let's perhaps have a celebration of football and hurling at the end of a really shitty year. Let's create this 4-week tournament between all the intercounty players and top club players around Ireland, and let's just pick a few teams and let's go at it. Let's televise it. Let's give money to health services if we're still under the pump. Whatever. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here, but it's certainly something when you mentioned it yesterday, where it's like, there could be an opportunity to do something fairly left field.
Yeah, how cool would the draft be? It would be sensational. Now, obviously, the reason for thinking about that was, again, to go back to the Luke O'Neill conversation. It was like, what if there's only over 30s who are allowed, or under 30s who are allowed to partake in contact sport, or if there's like a specific medical profile that you have to have, that you have to be happy enough to share with everybody that you have this medical profile, and then you have to be happy to go forward. And suddenly there's only like 400 people who can play contact sport in Ireland, and 200 of them are Gaelic footballers. Are we like, no, because there's 1 in Carlow and there's 3 in Dublin and there's 7 in Donegal, it wouldn't be fair to have? This is like, put them all in, have a team, have games, give us something to watch.
Yeah, it would still be cool to kind of siphon them off via geography as well. That like you could have Carlow people and Dublin fans kind of joining together to support East Leinster or whatever it is, and it will be a really beautiful time for East Leinster.
Well, it would be the pale and beyond the pale. That could be the cut-off point. Right, here and off the ball, we've been giving kids all around the country the chance to ask our top sports people whatever the hell they want. Brian O'Driscoll and Lee Keegan were the first 2 victims. Simon Zebo is next on the guest list on the OTB Kids Takeover. You can put a question to Simon, just WhatsApp OTB on 087 9 180 180. That's 087 9 180 180. And send it in a message, a voice note, or preferably a video. Flip the phone into landscape if you can, and we'll put the very best questions to Simon. Daniel Harris is going to join us to talk football next. But first, here's the former Arsenal defender Lee Dixon talking about the genius of Dennis Bergkamp.
How do you even begin to compare Bergkamp with an Anelka, with an Henry? Like, I mean, do you have a personal favourite out of all these that you kind of... it's a terrible question, I'm sorry, but it's just...
No, it's a question
with him every day.
I get asked it a lot, and it's who's the best player I've ever played with. And without it, before they've even finished the question, I'd just say Dennis Bergkamp. So who's Dennis Bergkamp? And they all go, yeah, fair enough. Right. Thierry was exceptional, and Thierry's, the question to Thierry, he always says Dennis Bergkamp. Dennis Bergkamp says Dennis Bergkamp. But Thierry was unstoppable. There was
ridiculous, yeah.
But Thierry, Dennis had a little bit more, a little bit more depth in his game. Thierry was a goal scorer. He could ruin a team on his own. He linked things up, a lot of assists. But Dennis had that little creative thing in his head that he could see a run before the player who's making a run has even thought of it. Because he would get the ball, he would come short, get the ball and turn, and then he would look at the defence and go, I can see a gap there. And then he'd look round and go, how come nobody's running it? Because I've seen it. And then someone like Freddie Lumber, who's probably the best at it, would be able to then latch onto, maybe Dennis put thoughts out there and went, somebody latch onto this because I've just seen a gap. And the defenders haven't really noticed. And then someone would make that run, and Dennis would always be waiting to play the ball. So he just got, there you go. Yeah. And Thierry didn't quite have that. So I think that's what just nudges him.
You're an Arsenal fan. What was who's your favourite?
Henry. The heights that he brought to the club are unparalleled. And Bergkamp, what is it? Ian Wright who always says Henry's the best player Arsenal ever had, and Bergkamp's the best signing Arsenal ever made, and I don't think he's far off the mark there. I think as well, Henry, a bit more youthful, and just on a whole personal level, I would have been gathering an awareness of football that would have crossed over a lot more with Henry than it would have with Bergkamp. I don't really remember the very early days of Dennis Bergkamp, and my childish wonder, unfortunately, came a little bit too late to appreciate the start of Bergkamp. But still unbelievable. Like you're asking me to compare my two of my top 5 footballers ever for Arsenal, but Henry would be my number 1.
It's worth digging out his book, Stillness and Speed. It's a very interesting and different type of book. Michael Winner goes off and interviews people about what they think about Dennis Bergkamp, and then tells Dennis Bergkamp what these people think of him. Some of them are not very positive about him, and it makes for a decent read as well. Right, let's move back to football, sticking with football rather. Daniel Harris is with us. Daniel, how are you getting on? What's the crack?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, how's your lock-in going?
I had Corona for the first couple of weeks of lockdown, which I wouldn't advise it particularly. I was lucky it was mild, but I would say mentally it's fairly demanding being shut in a room for 16 days as it was for me, wondering if you're going to die. But apart from that, it was okay.
What were the actual symptoms like? How bad did that get? What was that like?
For me, they were quite mild physically. No nausea. I had fever, as in did a lot of sweating, a lot of waking up from horrendous fever dreams in the night, looking like I was a vagrant who'd gone for a swim in a marsh. But I didn't feel ill exactly. And then headaches. It was a lot, for me anyway, it was a lot less unpleasant than flu or norovirus or anything like that. But as I said, like, being locked in a room for 16 days, not being able to have a shower or have anything to eat until someone brought you that stuff was trying. And also, you're mainly thinking about the idea. The thing with Corona is that most illnesses, you get it, and then by about day 2, you're as ill as you're going to get. And then you stay ill for a while, and then you may or you may not get better, but generally you get better, and it's quite a gradual thing. Whereas with Corona in the beginning, it's quite light at the beginning, but you can be fine for a week and then die, and you can be ill for a week and then die, and you can be a bit all right and a bit really ill for a week, get better, and then die. And that is quite hard to process, I guess, because it's unpredictable. Every variety is different. So until you kind of get better and come out of the bedroom, you're not really clear of that nagging fear of, I would prefer not to die at this point. So for me anyway, because the physical symptoms were minor, that was the thing that I found most troubling. But and also because I didn't have any of the telltale symptoms, I wasn't quite certain whether or not I'd even had it. I mean, I got norovirus once and didn't know I had norovirus, and then my wife said to me, "Why don't you have a look if you've got norovirus?" So I look at what the symptoms are, and it's like nausea, sickness, and you're like, check, like a kid collecting panini stickers, got. But then sickness, like, it's nondescript. And then I got to the point where it said pins and needles in the head. And at that point I thought, aha, pins and needles in the head is something I could probably quite enjoy, sitting there at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday listening to Moon Safari. I would consider that some kind of win. But yeah, I've definitely got norovirus because I've got pins and needles in my head. But with Corona, I didn't have any of the obvious things that are unique or almost unique to this illness until about 2 weeks afterwards. I was there's no particularly polite way of putting this over breakfast, but I noticed that I couldn't smell farts or shit, and I mean, that is the ultimate in he giveth and he taketh away action, obviously, because you can't smell other people's, but also you can't smell your own. And at that point, I actually felt some element of relief because the loss of smell and taste is particular to Corona, and that made me feel slightly more relaxed about the fact that, yeah, I had it and I wasn't imagining it. But otherwise, I'm all right now. I mean, I would say physically, it takes you a while to get back to where you were. Like, I think I'm now 3.5 weeks since I came out of the bedroom, and definitely physically I'm not quite where I was, probably still a bit tired, and you find that it adds 30 seconds onto your time for every kilometre that you may choose to run. But otherwise, I'm now all right. And I guess what we would say, ultimately, Corona is less fun than homeschooling. And that tells you that you don't want to get Corona.
Yeah, homeschooling, it turns out, is unbelievably difficult. Well, look, I'm glad to hear that you're well. Did you manage not to give it to your family? That's the most important thing.
Well, I did in that, well, you don't really know, because perhaps they had some version of it, perhaps they're immune to that particular version. But yeah, I did manage, my family did manage to avoid getting ill. And that's something else, because you're thinking, I don't want to leave my daughter without a father, but then I don't want to leave her without a mother or without herself either. And you're having these very peculiar conversations with yourself, because you're in a room for 16 days. You become very aware of what you're thinking, because there's nothing else to do. You become very aware of your breathing. Am I breathing all right? You wake up in the night and you're thinking, am I still working? Is this the day everything turns to shit? But yeah, everyone is fine, thank you. So that was relieving.
Right, and in the midst of all this, let's talk some Man United and football. And it's like, it does all seem faintly ludicrous that here we are, coming up with various off-the-ball ideas about what the future of the world and sport's going to look like. And yet, we actually need it. We do need this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Ultimately, football brings people joy and love and happiness, and we've never needed that more in some ways. So I don't think it's frivolous to talk about these things, because it's part of who we are, and we're allowed to talk about things that make us happy, particularly at a time when we're not happy. I mean, quite how it all works from here is very hard to fathom, and anyone who thinks that they have the plan that is the right plan is talking out their arse, because there isn't a right plan. There's a plan that will be, and we'll make the best of whatever that plan that will be happens to be, but there's not going to be, not every question has a perfect solution. And the question, where does football and sport go from here, it does not. It's an imperfect question, and it's not going to have a perfect solution.
I have a feeling we should talk about every possible scenario and solution and see exactly what this looks like into the future. At what point will it be safe for crowds to go back and congregate the way that they have been in the past? Probably when the entire world is vaccinated to a point where we have some form of herd immunity, or everybody's got it and everybody has the antibodies, and that's not going to be today or tomorrow or 2021, and possibly it could be all the way through to 2022.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're a long way from football in front of crowds, or from any sport in front of crowds. I would be worried about the Olympics. I'd be worried about Euro 2020, May 21, May 2020 happening also. But in terms of playing football behind closed doors, it's really easy to sort of dismiss that and say, well, football's not television. Football's not a TV show. And as someone who has spent a lot of their life going to football matches, I feel that very deeply in my soul. However, if it is possible to play football behind closed doors and to provide people with joy at this point, and it can be done safely, then I think that is probably not a bad idea, partly because people will enjoy it. And I think that it's fine for people to enjoy it. And obviously all this comes with the proviso that it must be safe. And also, it's really easy to say, well, it's just because of money, and money makes football go round. But it's actually a little bit more complex than that, because we're not just talking about money for Abramovich or for the Glazers or PR for Abu Dhabi or any of that. We're talking about people's livelihoods. If football is able to make money, then football clubs are able to employ people, and TV stations are able to employ people, and football clubs are able to keep going. And football clubs able to keep going is partly about people's livelihoods and also about people's heritage. The idea that loads of football clubs will go to the wall if the football season doesn't continue and the money doesn't trickle down means that is a good reason to waive the football is not a TV show argument and play football behind closed doors just this once, because there is a greater purpose of keeping football clubs alive. Now, whether the bigger clubs can be trusted to make sure that happens is another matter, and actually probably a matter for the government, because the government has responsibility to make sure that football clubs don't go to the wall in the same way it had a responsibility to keep out the likes of Roman Abramovich, Abu Dhabi and the Glazers, and it would appear Saudi Arabia. the Saudi Arabian royal family from our game, and they failed at that. But what they now need to do is to do something to make sure that football clubs can continue and that people's livelihoods are protected. And if playing the rest of the season behind closed doors is what it takes, then much as it's anathema to what I feel in my soul about football, then that is something that I think probably has to be done, if possible.
Yeah, and I mean, the simple explanation for why it has to happen is that you can't get the crowds back until you get the football back and see how many. Is it now safe to have 2,000? Is it safe to have 4,000? Is it safe to have 8,000? Is it safe to have 10,000? Because it's not going to go from 0 to full stadiums in Old Trafford and Anfield and Stamford Bridge overnight. Like, this is a graduated return to getting back to what football used to be. Or else maybe look, I don't know, maybe that never happens, but we have to try. Like, if our generation's ask is to watch football behind closed doors for a month, a year and a half, then I think we're okay with that, right? We can do that.
Yeah, I mean, whatever it takes is whatever it takes. I mean, everyone's agreed that football is good and we like football, but ultimately it can't continue until it's ready to continue, and particularly given football's responsibility in taking us to where we are now. The Atalanta Valencia game, the Liverpool Atletico game, were significant drivers of a global pandemic. So I hope that we're not going to jump back in too quickly, given we know what that entails, and we don't know what's going to be. All we can do is rely on the integrity of the scientists and. Gosh, I'm blanching and bulking when I say this, and the integrity of the government and football authorities, because we don't have any control over it. But I mean, I think we're now at the point where, in the same way that when lockdown is eased, people are going to be frightened about going to work, I think that people are also going to be frightened about going to big events like football matches. And I hate saying that, but I think it's probably true.
It's Daniel, when we consider what is actually going to happen with football over the next couple of weeks and months, it's an interesting question about where certain players are positioned and where their futures may lie. I think it's almost every second day you've got somebody on Instagram Live talking about Paul Pogba, talking about where his future lies, talking about where Jadon Sancho is going to end up. It's a very strange situation to be in, and it's hard to know whether or not you are the better placed person if you have the bargaining chip at your disposal, or if you're the person without the bargaining chip. For example, in the Jadon Sancho situation, it's hard to know whether or not Dortmund are better placed here because they actually have the asset and can sell, or if Manchester United are actually going to be in a brilliant position in, say, 3-4 months' time, whenever the transfer window is actually a real thing again, and they can actually offer a cut price for a player like Jadon Sancho. I'm not sure if you've considered the impact on the transfer window.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to talk about who's going to buy who until we know what the financial damage of this whole thing is. Because, yeah, as you say, it may be that players who are worth a lot of money become worth less money, and they become worth little enough money so that it's not even worth selling them on part of the selling club. Or it may be that, with all players really, that it is very hard to keep a player who wants to leave. And usually it becomes about whether the club's agreeing a price. But I think it's also the case that just because football is this multi-billion-pound industry, just because football clubs make a load of money, it doesn't mean that they don't necessarily operate on the margins. So you might have football clubs who turn over a lot of money, but the margin between them turning over a lot of money and being in trouble can be quite slim. So I think until we know the extent of what this is going to cost, it's really hard to measure who's going to go anywhere and who's going to be in what position. I mean, I think specifically with Jadon Sancho, does look like he wants to go home to England, and Dortmund are probably going to, United, I would guess, will be able to offer, in whatever circumstance, enough to make Dortmund sell, whether it's the amount that they would have paid had none of this happened, or a slightly reduced amount given everyone's got a bit less money and everyone needs money a bit more. So I would imagine that one will happen. I'd be pretty shocked if anyone had the money to buy Paul Pogba, though. I think that PSG could do it if they sold Neymar, but who's got the money or even the inclination to buy Neymar? Probably no one. So I'm sure that we will see very few big deals because very few clubs have enough money to handle what's going on and still be able to do that. We'll see one or two probably, because there'll be a couple of clubs that have enough for one big deal probably, but I don't think we'll see very much.
So swap deals?
We're going to see. So swaps are rare because it's rare that you have players that want to go to the club and the country and that want to swap with someone. So, we don't see a lot of them because there's so much involved. Like, do the players both want to go to the opposing clubs? Do they want to live in the opposing country? Do they want to live in the opposing city? Does the money work? Is there room for them? So we might see loans more, but I'd be relatively surprised if we saw swaps because they just require so many things that don't have anything to do with money at all, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's going to be very interesting to see how football deals with all the contractual issues, the fact that the seasons all are going to end after everybody's contract runs out, and whether or not a transfer might happen or a loan might happen for some clubs if the league comes back. There is a minefield coming, and I don't really envy anybody whose job it is to try and navigate their way out of that. Daniel, good to see you looking well, and thanks so much for sharing your story with us today.
See you again, guys.
It's Daniel Harris, who has recovered, thankfully, from COVID-19. Right, if you want to get in touch with us, you can WhatsApp us. 0879 180 180 is the number. You can always use the hashtag OTB AM. With our new series, How's the Head, we've been checking in with a different athlete every day to hear how they're getting on and any recommendations that they might have for us. This morning, we're hearing from Laois dual star Cara Healy. He caught up with Will O'Callaghan for a chat.
Not too bad, actually. I've plenty to keep me busy. I'm trying to learn a bit of Italian each morning. I'm teaching online each day. I'm trying to push the fundraiser now, do it for Dan. So I've plenty going on. And I've started to use the cookbooks that you buy every Christmas a little bit more too. I'd say okay, yeah. I'd say I'm not scared. I can follow a recipe. I wouldn't be very good. My partner, she's Italian. She's quite good at just looking at something and going, "Oh, I'll throw this with this and that'll work well." And there you have your dinner. Whereas I don't have those skills. But I'm not afraid of the kitchen, I would say. We don't have to stick with the 2K. So I have a bike, so I'm out just to try keep the weight down and keep the heart in check. I have the bike to go out, and at the minute, most of my rehab can be done indoors. I have a few kind of home gym equipments that I'm able to work away with. So that's, as regards training, that's all I'm at. The gyms are obviously closed, and I find that hard because I don't like training at home in the house. Even if it was only a Monday night and I was only doing half an hour foam rolling and stretch and recovery, I'd always tip over to the gym to do it because I always kind of had a thing that my house is relaxed. I'm not thinking about anything. I'm, a complete depressurized zone. Whereas when I have to train in the house, my relaxation area and my training area are the same place. I don't really like that too much. But look, could be worse. I've no complaints regarding everything that's going on outside the door with COVID-19 and people losing jobs and everything. I have no complaints. I'm very lucky. Kind of struggling for the next one. I started the Last Dance. Watched the last 2 episodes, last 2 nights. Brilliant, great start. So I've itchy feet now, waiting for the next one of those next week. That's what I'm on. Yeah, but I've plenty of schoolwork to do during the day. I'm trying to learn a bit of Italian each morning, and I've my training to do each day. So I've loads, and then you put in Netflix then too. So I've plenty to keep me going for the day. My feeling is people they don't know him either. I would feel there's still a bit of mystique about him. You hear the stories, but you've never seen him behind closed doors. What is he really like training? And you kind of got a small few clips of that. Was he cursing someone out in one of the trainings? It was Ron Harper or something. I think he was just like, "I'm going to keep shouting at you until you do it." And I was kind of like, right, so he really is kind of what the stories kind of say about the intensity, or every single training was life or death, or win, you got to win this. I'm lucky I have my work still to do. We have a meeting with the children every morning at 9:45, just a little quick one over Google Meet. So I have to be up early for that. So I kind of get up earlier then to try do things before that. I'll try do a little bit of Italian. Like a lot of good stuff has come free since this lockdown. Like Rosetta Stone, if that's what you're into, is a really good tool. That's what I'm using at the minute. Alongside some online lessons that I'm paying for with a tutor. But the Rosetta Stone is really good. So if people are looking to learn a language or something, it's free for the next 3 months. So pick your holiday destination for a year's time and sign up to Rosetta Stone.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio. Off the ball.
But when I got to Liverpool, I thought, right, I've bought myself a nice Aston Martin. I pulled up on the lights alongside Roy Keane, of all people, and I had the shades on. I think I was listening to some speed garage. My arm was out the window. I was having myself. And then Roy gave me that look that he's given many a people in his time. And as he sped off into the distance, I was sitting in this car, looked at myself in the mirror and thought, I need to get rid of this.
Off the ball. Weeknights from 7 and weekends from 1. This is OTB Sports Radio. OTB AM.
So yesterday morning on offtheball.com we published our first ever oral history. It's called Walking on Water, the story of how the GPA won their war with the GAA, and its author is Arthur James O'Dea, who joins us now. Arthur, good morning to you. How you doing?
Good morning to you. How's things?
Yeah, good. This ad was something that had ripped its way into your consciousness as a kid. You were like, and that's why you wanted to find out what the hell happened, where it came from, and what stuff 'twas made of.
Yeah, I suppose, like, from my point of view, so I was 13 when it came out, but it was just 2 years after Sligo had beaten Tyrone in Croke Park, had gotten within an All-Ireland semi-final, just lost to that Tyrone team in a replay, and Eamon O'Hara had his All-Star. So this was like just peak GAA fandom time. It was perfect. So for this ad to come out, it was worked in a perfect it was a perfect blend. And it just stuck with me.
Eamon O'Hara's in the ad, obviously, so that helped as well. Yeah. One of my favourite bits of detail from the entire 3,500 words is that one of the things that Club Energise did was they activated the campaigns locally. So in Kilkenny, it was a picture of Shefflin. In Cork, it was a picture of the Rock. And there were billboards of Eamon O'Hara in Sligo. But what happened to them?
I'm not sure he knows. Well, I don't know. Given the time, he reckons it's put down to a gust of wind or some of the lads in town. But I don't know. It would have come out in about April, May. So I'm not sure how windy it was. But yeah, it didn't. I don't think it lasted too long, unfortunately. But none of the rest of the lads really remembered any billboards of themselves, funnily enough.
Right, okay. It didn't survive. Maybe there weren't that many of them in Sligo. Obviously, there's not that many sites that you wouldn't spot it. Apparently it was quite close to his home place or quite close to the ground?
Oh, I'd say it was closer to town. I think he's out from South Sligo. Right. I don't think it'd be too close. Yeah, closer to town. But I don't remember that now, to be honest with you. I can't remember seeing it anyway.
What did you discover as you started to dig into this?
I suppose it was kind of informed because I suppose when you're talking to them at different points, you're kind of piecing it together. So I think initially I'd talked to certainly 2 or 3 of the players. I think Eamon O'Hara was actually the first. So from their perspective, it kind of begins and ends with the actual ad. So whenever they record it in kind of April 2004, and that's kind of it's encased within that period of time. Then when you talk about Donal O'Neill, obviously from the GPA, it goes the whole way back to the late 90s where he's starting off, where his story starts off. And consequently, when you talk to the lads from the ad agency, it goes in beyond the ad again. So it's kind of, it was quite interesting to just start with the players, and it's a narrow enough window of kind of interest that they would have had in it. Because obviously they're not as concerned as kind of, I think Stephen McDonald said, like football was still first and foremost. So it's just 3 days of going, bit of crack, bit of money, and then back to business. Whereas I suppose with these other people, it was a wider concern. And I think it was just fascinating to me, I suppose, the personal/professional importance it was to someone like Donal O'Neill with the GPA. And then just, I suppose, the opportunity it was for an ad agency, Cawley Knee they were at the time, to do something quite different, completely different. And an area that they had no previous experience and no real interest in, and then just to nail it like they did, just to harness something that seems so obvious. And you talk about the billboard campaign, it seems so obvious to go, well, Eamon O'Hara, for example, has however tens of thousands or 30,000 in Sligo that he can appeal to, and everyone knows who he is there, so put him there. Don't put Sean O'Halpine there. People might know him, but there's not the same connection. And it makes such sense, but it's just remarkable that no one had ever done it on that scale before.
That's why it's important. That's why, for like Donaghy O'Neill's story, for example, and what this means for the GPA. So this isn't just a TV ad. People now, here we are sitting at 28th of April 2020 in a global pandemic are going, what's the big deal? It's a TV ad. Why does this matter? Why does it matter?
I think it matters because you kind of see everything that came after it. Like it's not too long, I don't know the exact timelines, but it's not too long after that you had the situation with Cork and the players in the county board and the club Energize versus I think there was some issue, wasn't there, in the game, and it was something in Thurles, and the Cork county board I think had their deal with Lucozade, and they wanted the Lucozade bottles on the sideline, and Cork, the hurlers as a GPA members, had their situation, I suppose, where there would have been a preference towards club Energize. And I think actually when you go through Sports File now, I think it was a game against Waterford in 2004. And it was obviously in the news beforehand because the photographers had picked up bottles side by side of a kind of a dark blue bottle with Club Energize and the sort of lighter blue bottle with Lucozade on it, just sat beside each other, beside Donaghy Cusack in the goal. And so it's obviously that was part of the narrative building up. But I think it's just, when you consider like at the same time, so like it's a hard thing to kind of quantify, but it's I suppose the fact that what we see then in 2004 was just the first of what's a complete normality now in how GA players are used to sell products to us.
And why did Club Energize matter for the GPA?
Well, I mean, I think just financially it put them on a whole different level, and in terms of, none of the lads really want to discuss numbers, but in terms of integrity and their standing as a serious association going forward themselves, it really made the GAA wake up by all accounts, or take heed, certainly. Like, you couldn't really brush them off. Here they are with a deal that certainly would have went into the millions, it's safe to say. Certainly when, after the success of Club Energize itself, which was an astounding success, and that just, I think, gave them a firm footing going forward. Now, it's very interesting. I don't think it actually was in there, but so Donaghy O'Neill, when they made the deal, it was a 5-year deal, I think, initially. And he was saying how late on in that he agreed with Michael McArdle of CNC to turn it into a 10-year deal. So it's like, you may as well double it. There's plenty of little opt-outs along the way where if either party wasn't happy, they could get out of the deal. But nominally, it was going to be a 10-year deal. And he, quite interestingly, obviously, I don't think either man was there by the time that 10-year deal elapsed. But he thought it probably, in hindsight, made the GPA a little bit complacent. That they'd kind of done their big deal, and it didn't necessarily, and this is just his opinion, obviously his point of view, but they didn't necessarily have the same hunger going forward, maybe, or they weren't quite as alert as they had been in the build-up to securing what he called like the big one. I suppose that's kind of understandable as well. It's in hindsight, I think that was 2004. I think he was gone by 2007. So it's hard to know, I suppose, if you're not on the inside.
So there's an argument that this is a hinge point for the GPA. And up to this point, they're upstarts, they're angry and they're aggressive, and there's socks down and there's protests. But actually, let them blow themselves out. Where are their offices even at this stage? I think they're probably still above the Cat and Cage, or had they moved somewhere? And all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, this is a big deal that we're going to have to talk to these lads, aren't we?
And I think that seems to be the I don't know, it's strange in hindsight. I suppose when you're looking back from the GA's point of view at the time, it kind of makes sense that they would feel pretty comfortable that we'll outstay. It doesn't come at us and we'll see what happens. And, because I suppose one has all the money, all the prestige, all everything else. The other one's an upstart. But it's quite interesting when you're talking to the lads who were looking kind of completely objective at the time. So especially the guys from the advertising agency who, in certain respects had no interest in sport whatsoever. But they all recount particularly their dealings with Desi Farrell as this hugely impressive figure. He's just this kind of guy. He knows exactly what he wants. He knows exactly how to do it. He knows exactly how to get what he wants. And I think that just permeated everybody across, from the director, who never would have met him before, may have never heard of him before, to the managing director of the ad agency, to the creative art director. All these guys had no idea really who he was, but were so struck by what his capabilities and just his confidence and his determination. And I mean, I think Chris Cawley, particularly, who was the MD of Cawley Knee at the time, really couldn't distinguish between what the GPA was and Dessie Farrell. As far as he was concerned, they were one and the same thing. But Farrell was the driving force behind this thing.
The sheer force of his personality wills into existence the players' representative body that now, to this day, has an important role and a seat at the table. So the ad, they were probably going to get there anyway, but the ad is a force multiplier for how fast they get there.
I think so. I mean, it's just, it's amazing in hindsight. Like, it's 16 years old now, but I don't think you'd have any issue releasing the same premise again now, and it would have the same sort of impact. It's just, I mean, it's funny the way that, I think it was Chris Cawley was talking about that idea of playing into the Irish mysticism part of it. And that didn't really strike me kind of at the first time. It was just this cool thing. It's like, it looks deadly. Where is that? Where's that huge lake? All these players, you're trying to pick them out. You see, like, some things you see, like, I think there was like a Down jersey in there, there's a Clare jersey in there, but those guys are just extras.
Right.
I don't know why. But it's just, there's so much to pick up on it on first viewing that, and only then when you're kind of right, I'm satisfied with that. I'm satisfied I know who's there. I'm satisfied I know what happens, everything else. But then you start just breaking down into the actual concept of it. And just the fact to think that we'll have these guys walking on water is such a basic thing. There's not really much more. I mean, if you go really deep into it, there's not really, how do you confer sort of a sense of godliness or a sense of this something beyond human? And it's like, well, you could have yourself walking on water or you could fly. There's probably one or the two things that you could probably have them doing to show that they're not human. And like, it's even interesting. I think one of the later ads for Club Energize as well is shot on top of, it seems to be like a series of windmills, like the wind turbines more so. And I suppose that's playing to the other extreme. It's not quite flying, but it's almost there insofar as how'd you get up there? But it's the same type of thing. And it's just playing to that very basic thing, but executing it so well. And in the 60-second one in particular, I mean, it's a beautiful, I mean, I think it was Colin Hart, the creative director, who said about the director that he just has, they hired him in because he makes, he makes shit look cool. And that was why they hired him in. And you can see it. It's like in the 60-second cut of the ad. I think there's one where it's just Shefflin's hurl. I'm not sure if it's him or not. Just kind of skirting along the top of the water. And it's just like, it sets the scene before the actual match kicks off. And it's just amazing. It's so well done. And it's so simple, but it's so effective. It's so lasting. It's just on that basic premise. How will we make them look like legends, like gods? Walk on water.
Well, it worked. Arthur, great stuff. It's 3,500 words. It's well worth everybody's time. The ad itself obviously is embedded in the piece, and we'll tweet it out again now. It's all over our social channels. Good work, Arthur. Thanks a million for bringing us that nice little slice of nostalgia and the history behind it as well. Some breaking news this morning. The former Republic of Ireland and Liverpool striker Michael Robinson has passed away at the age of just 61. He was diagnosed with skin cancer in 2018. He obviously won the European Cup, First Division, League Cup with Liverpool in 83, 84. Just 24 Irish caps, but 4 goals between 1980 and 1986. He played with Preston, Queen's Park Rangers and Osasuna in Spain, and then famously went on to become a TV presenter in Spain, hosting, I think, one of the main football TV shows over there. So a brilliant, brilliant career, and very sad news this morning that Michael Robinson has passed away at the age of 61. We'll have more details on that on offtheball.com across today, and of course a proper obituary about the brilliant career that he put together, and more, I guess, on this evening's show on Off the Ball from 7 o'clock as well. Right, let's move on, because obviously for the last couple of weeks we've been putting together shows around the Jordan documentary series, which is out on Netflix at the moment. It's a 10-part, 10-hour special brought to you by ESPN essentially, and our show is called Talking Bull. Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls, and Dennis Rodman, Ronan Mullen, Kieran, Donaghy, Jarlath, Regan and Eoin are straight back after these.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports
Radio. You're very
Radio.
welcome along to
OTB Sports Radio.
If you're feeling a little like you're going a bit stir crazy, take a break and listen to Richie's Isolation Mix. 1 hour of ad-free music every day from midday on OTB Sports Radio, live 24/7 on the Go Loud app.
OTB AM.
You are very welcome along to Off the Bull. We're here every week chatting through The Last Dance, streaming here in Ireland on Netflix every Monday morning. We've got Off the Ball's Ronan Mullen here. We've got Kerry football and Tralee basketball legend Kieran Donaghy here. And the host of Irishman Abroad, Jarlath Regan, is with us too. Also host of An Irishman Abroad, Inside Basketball. Lads, you're all very welcome. We've got to start with two things here. I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe Kieran, you can go first with what you're wearing here. We'll get on to you, Jarlath, in a moment. What is that, Kieran?
That's my Irish team tracksuit when I was captain of Ireland as about a 5'8" or 5'9" 16-year-old, and it's actually it's too big for me now. So I know there's a picture it was on my Lake Regale of me accepting the award, the trophy from in the Four Nations when we beat England in the final, and the sleeve of this thing is down around nearly my wrist. So whether they gave the culture you buy from Kerry the wrong size on purpose, I don't have a clue what's going on. But I was captain and I was the smallest player in the team, and there's no way I should have had something like this on me at all. So, but it was from 98, 99, 98. So I just said they were talking a lot about 98, 97, 98 in the season. That was the time where my basketball interests were peaked. So I only came across it when I was rooting out the prizes from my the jerseys for my GoFundMe campaign for Dan, Do It for Dan. And I came across this. I didn't realize I put it away all these years ago. So I said, yeah, time to throw it back on again.
Jarlath, what are you sporting?
This is the warm-up jacket from when I was captain of the Bulls when I was 15 years old. Yeah, no, lads, this is just part of the kind of stuff that I own to wear around the house.
no better thing to wear around.
To wear it. Yeah, while watching this, that's what you do.
Before we get into this week's documentary, I just see you've got Roland Lazenby's book over your shoulder there. You had him on the podcast last week. Any nuggets from that for people who haven't heard the show?
Yeah, well, the show isn't released yet. I guess we're trying to backlog as many episodes as possible and then release it kind of as a binge so that everybody can enjoy them. And I had Pat Burke on the week before. Pat is obviously the only Irish-born person ever to play in the NBA. His is fascinating, but Roland obviously is key to this because, I mean, his book, Blood on the Horns, for me is the inspiration for this. This Last Dance doesn't happen without that. And obviously with the footage that was kept under wraps. And I guess he spoke a little bit more about what Kieran mentioned last week, about how, they can paint Krause as the villain, but every turn this takes, you're going to see that Krause really engineered this. That this week we did see Krause, as Lazenby said, have the light bulb moment of Tex Winter's triangle is going to work here. The triangle is... So that does emanate from Krause. He had a bunch of stuff, though. I'll be honest with you. I don't want to ruin any of it because he had so many little insights, including a lot of stuff about American history and racism, because I kind of put it to him about Jordan saying Republicans also buy sneakers as one of his most infamous quotes. And why, if he was driven by rage, as we know Jordan was, driven by chip on his shoulder, vendetta, anger actually was his fuel, then why did he feel no anger towards the system, the situation that he found himself in? Let's not forget, Public Enemy are number one. There's so many other great basketball icons like Bill Russell and Kareem that stood up. Why didn't he? It really is a puzzle. And in that, Roland Lazenby has probably done more research on this than any other person in the world, kind of dug into the depth of racism in North Carolina and how people from there tended towards believing that business success was all they could hope for.
I really hope we get that in The Last Dance as well. Like, I'm not sure how 3D a picture we're going to get of the whole thing. There is obviously a big theory out there that perhaps Jordan is just simply apolitical in a lot of what he says and the way he thinks. So that could be a simple enough explanation. In terms of episode 3 and 4, Ronan, we might start with you. What did you make of this? I thought it was fairly spectacular. I think Dennis Rodman is a subject matter that is never going to disappoint, for example.
Yeah, and amazing. And I think one of the concerns a lot of people from the outside looking in would have had about this when they saw a 10-part documentary is that there could be a lot of filler here, you know, try and stretch it out. Was there a need for 10 episodes? I think from the first 4 and from these 2 in particular, you see that they've actually left a lot on the cutting room floor. There was stuff they could have delved into more with Dennis Rodman in particular. And we mentioned off air, like he's a case study for a couple of decades now. People probably know his story in depth to this point. So they had to decide which bits to focus on. But his story growing up, like the amount of siblings he had is on, like I think he says his siblings are in the 40s. Like it's a crazy family that he's come from. And that his sisters were actually the basketball prodigies growing up. He wasn't an athletic freak by any means. And similarly to Jordan and Pippen, he had a growth spurt late on, went to college as a freshman at 22, you know, all this kind of crazy stuff. And much like Jordan and Pippen, as I said, kind of had the touch of smaller players, but like the frame of bigger players. He had like the hustle of a 5'10" player when he was walking around at 6'7". And that stood to him so much. Like they framed it really well, how like much of a fulcrum he was to that Pistons team. And then ultimately he was a crucial part of that second strand for the Bulls too.
Kieran, what do you make of Dennis Rodman and what his greatest strength was as a basketball player?
To be honest, Owen, like, you know, Jordan was my idol growing up, but I modelled my game when I realised I couldn't be Jordan because I just wasn't good enough. I modelled my game on Dennis Rodman. I had more Rodman posters in my room than I had Jordan. I had very little of Pippen actually when I was thinking back about this last night. Rodman was my guy. I liked him in Detroit. I liked the bad boys, even though they were going against Jordan. I liked how they played, and I grew fonder of them as it went on. But for me, Rodman was, you know, he's the glue guy, and I love the way Gary Payton put it. Like Gary Payton said, he's the fuck up person.
Yeah.
You know, he's the guy who just messes with everything, and he could guard Joe Dumars, who's probably one of the best 2-guard defenders in the history of the NBA. Really strong, solid guy. Maybe in this day and age, now he might be a bit too small, but back then he was 6'4". He was perfect next to Isaiah Thomas and a really good defender. And to hear him talking about Dennis Rodman's defensive ability, you know, Rodman was wild. What I loved about him, and I had an American coach, Russ Bradford, who coached us. He brought over an American one time. He told me this guy's got the quickest second jump ever. And I was kind of like, what do you mean the quickest second jump? And he was like, look, you'll see after a few training sessions. The guy's name was Chris Thompson from Louisiana, 6'8", long. But yeah, like Russ said, and like Rodman said, if you looked at the first 4 or 5 rebounds they showed of Rodman last night, he had 5 tips in one of them in an NBA game against Charles Barkley. He tipped it. So the second jump is when the ball's in the air that you get down and get back up before the other guy. Then he tipped it again, he tipped it again, he tipped it again. Then they showed one in college. He tipped it 3 times or 4 times around the basket. So that second jump is how he was able to be such a good rebounder. And then, you know, his athletic ability and the way Jordan and the guys spoke about him, that it took them 4 laps to catch this guy. Like, you know, he was just going to throw himself out there. He was going to die for the cause. He didn't care about offense. You know, I never really cared too much about offense either. In either sport I played, it was all about just trying to win. And I think Rodman realised very quickly after his first few seasons, and when he came out of college, he was scoring 26, 27 points because he was just a freak athlete by the time he left college. And I think when he went to the NBA, he realised his offensive game wasn't good enough. But what he did realise is, okay, I can be the best defensive player in the game. I can be the best rebounder in the game. And I can influence the game just as much as a guy that's scoring 30 points. And that's what I loved about watching him, and just the way he just go get it. He just went after everything. He was, as I said, look, I did model a lot of my game on him. I still do. For me, it's all about rebounds and defense when I'm playing with the Warriors. And I think he was very much that guy on this Bulls team and the Pistons team. And you know, when I was looking back at these stats last night, his 2 years in San Antonio were off the charts. 17 rebounds, 17.3 and 16.9 a game with a team that he didn't really get on with. So he's just a freak of a guy, and an unbelievable gel guy to help you win championships, which he has 5 of them and probably could have 1 more.
Jarlath, what's your take on Dennis Rodman when you're wearing your Chicago Bulls memorabilia? Is it just this guy is an icon in your mind, or how do you view him?
I was really like, when they signed him, like every Bulls fan was like, this is never going to work. This is never going to work. I was as shocked as anyone. I was like, they hate this guy. Like, everyone hated this guy because, as Gary said, he was the fuck shit up guy. If people aren't aware of what that term is, he's the fella who you'd play against in a Gaelic football match who was shite at football, but made it impossible for you to concentrate on what you were trying to do just by his sheer annoyance, like a bug buzzing around your head the whole time. And I hated him. Like, I absolutely hated him. And I couldn't understand the signing at all. And I thought, this will either blow up or this will be the greatest thing they ever did. Personally, I'm not that interested in him.
Right.
I'm not that. I'm not. I was like, I didn't share the anticipation people had for the Rodman episode, because I feel like a lot of the antics aren't that. There's not that nowadays. Really, you dyed your hair, you got some tattoos. That's not a big deal anymore. You know, his sometimes the whole antics around it, of going to Vegas, of wanting to party, be a party boy. You know, there's no big explanation or theoretical underpinning of any of that. A lot of it was just, I want to have a good time. And
was it not him escaping, Jarlath? Was it not him escaping when he's sitting there with a gun in his car in Detroit and he's depressed? Was it not was all this a kind of a release for him to be different? He wanted to be different, and maybe he felt he couldn't do it, and then he just kind of got to the point where, geez, I was about to blow the head off of myself. Do you know what? I'm going to be me, and I'm going to party and dye my hair and do whatever I want, and you can all just get along with it. He said at one stage last night he felt like a 10-year-old again, because he is a big kid.
Yeah, like, to me, when I heard about that stuff back in the 90s, and even the more it wore on, the more books I read, the more I was like, this is somebody with a mental health issue, and addiction.
Yeah,
is
very possibly undiagnosed.
Phil didn't try and get him into rehab. Nobody actually tried to address what was underneath. Everybody just went, well, sure, look, if he wants to have a few pints, let him off for 48 hours. I mean, if there was a player in the Kerry team who you knew had an actual problem and had come close to suicide, it would be absolutely controversial if it ever emerged that the Kerry management gave him a vacation to Vegas in the middle of the season, rather than actually trying to get him help in the direction he needed it. That wasn't what he needed. He didn't need a vacation. He needed an intervention. Now, who's to say? I guess the balance that there was, the equation that was done there was, well, if we do that, will that completely ruin his season? Or do we do this and we can keep him kind of tipping over and we can still win the championship? It's a very calculated Machiavellian business decision at the end of the day.
Well, it's very, very, very interesting point, Jarlath. While I'm saying this, Kieran, if you wouldn't mind turning your phone around landscape, as we can get a good look of the jerseys there behind you. But like, that's really interesting, Jarlath. Like, I mean, and I think it kind of points to everybody involved in the whole Bulls organisation, not just Jackson, but also Jordan and the enabler that he was here. He thought to himself, well, the best way we can get all of Dennis Rodman for all of the playoffs and all his under the boards ability is to allow him to release that valve for a couple of nights. And who cares what he does for those couple of nights? I will personally go to his hotel room to remove him from this situation as long as we are winning.
Well, it was probably their only option, really, Eoin. Was it like, you know, I know what Jarlath's saying is actually the right thing to do. And of course, in hindsight, it probably would have been better for him. But when a person goes into rehab or tries to get help, and I actually agree with Jarlath, he's probably on the verge of bipolar, probably has bipolar, but back in the day, none of these things were kind of really, you know, to the fore, and people didn't talk about them and people didn't admit that they were. There's nothing wrong with being bipolar, you know, it's a condition, you know, there's medication there to help. And I'm sure if it was nowadays, Rodman would be a lot calmer of a character. He'd be on medication and he'd probably be still playing. Whereas a person that wants help, you can't force somebody into help. Somebody has to reach the lowest point where they need to look for help and or do what Dennis did, which was you know, come to the verge of taking their own life, and then actually said, you know what, I'm just going to be me, and everyone's just going to have to get on with it, no matter what I do, whether I wear dresses or dye my hair. But, you know, the Bulls had no option at that stage. I'd say Phil and Michael were like, you know, there's no way Jordan being the kind of competitive, like there's no other guy in that squad would have got away with that. So Jordan obviously felt this guy just needs it. He needs this pressure valve release. He's really been locked in. He's been really good for a few months. Scotty's back now. You know, he can take a week or whatever it turned into. They never really elaborated how long it took for Jordan to go into the hotel room to himself and Carmen Electra to get him out of there. But, you know, that was probably the only option for them to kind of keep Rodman dialed in, as mad as it seems. And, you know, and these are the characters that just aren't going to be ever in the game anymore, because you just can't get away with that type of lifestyle. But, you know, that was his release valve. And he was, you know, especially in Chicago, more so in San Antonio, he started to change. He dyed his hair blonde like your man in Demolition Man, Wesley Snipes. And that's when it all kind of really started kicking in, him being himself and him being a real rebel.
And Madonna,
because under Chuck,
it seems that she has the piece of advice for him, which is you can be whatever you want to be, and that was the thing that inspired a lot of that. It was like
the assistant coach talking to him in Detroit, talking to Rodman, and Chuck Daly went over and just said, "Just leave him alone. Don't put a saddle on a Mustang. You know, just leave the guy off. Just leave him do what he does." But every coach, in fairness, like most coaches, probably bar the San Antonio experience and the Mavericks experience, just they couldn't handle him. But the guys that could handle him, the Chuck Dalys and the Phil Jacksons, you saw what they got out of him. They got 5 championships out of him. So it just shows you that there's not part of.
Go ahead.
No, nowadays in sport, it's kind of paint everybody with the one brush. We must all do it this way. There's no space for any Rodmans or any guys that just want to be different or want to do their own thing. I think everybody now is painted with the same brush. You must do this. You must be on time. There's no, you know, that's the way sport has gone in the modern era. Whereas back then it wasn't, and it was the guys that could handle him and give him the rope when they needed to. Probably got the best out of him.
I think it was part of Phil that's identified in it, that Phil saw himself in Dennis, and I'm not sure how much Phil put on psychotherapy, on clinics. I think that the sense I got, and the sense I get from reading around Phil Jackson, was that, you know, he does believe in the spirit, and actually that Native American stuff ahead of science in many ways. He probably felt, like he said, that he was this type of member of the tribe. And the sense I get, I don't know if you share this, is that Phil probably taking Dennis on was a kind of a project, just in the sense that here's somebody who needs help, and I have all of this philosophical stillness, presence, the shots of them doing yoga. These are all things that will benefit him. And he, I don't know if you agree with this, but he's such a teacher that I would imagine that Phil's approach was, this guy's making great progress. He has to be allowed 2 days off from that progress. And that maybe rather than sending him to Priory or somewhere at the Betty Ford clinic, that actually being with the Bulls and giving him the focus and the structure that he needed was actually the best thing he could do for him.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. And I definitely think it's portrayed as kindred spirits here when it comes to Jackson and Dennis Rodman. Ronan, what did you make of the whole Rodman story and the way it's portrayed, at least in episode 3 of The Last Dance?
Yeah, and like as we said last week, Jackson is probably as interesting a person in this whole story as anybody, and it ties as much into Rodman as anybody. And he describes him as Hyoka in the Native American scope, which directly means sacred clown. And I think that kind of encapsulates what people thought of Dennis Rodman in the 90s. But I think we got a real insight into the little, not so much a macro level, but what made him tick on a micro level. And you saw it with the cigar story with Michael Jordan, where he got fouled out of a game. And rather than going up and saying, I'm sorry, he went over to his hotel room and asked for a cigar. That was his way of saying sorry. He probably couldn't bring himself to do it in a conventional way. And then you saw about his first meeting with Phil Jackson, where Phil walked in and Rodman didn't stand up. and Phil Jackson asked him to stand up, and that kind of set the tone for their relationship as well, I thought. And even Kieran mentioned it, like his rebounding was off the charts, and people would probably put that down to bloody mindedness. Like it's kind of a disrespected element of basketball in the grand scheme of things, where people probably are more interested in the finesse of shooting and passing. But like the way he talked about the science of rebounding, where he studied Larry Bird's shot and he knew what way it spun and what way it would rebound off the boards, like that's next level stuff. I can't imagine there were too many players thinking on that level. So I think we all knew the macro story, but on this one we got a real insight into the little fundamentals that made him tick.
Yeah, he's an unbelievably good reader of the game. That's the thing that I learned about Dennis Rodman. I probably should have known it already. And I think there's definitely truth in the fact that all the scandal, and I have that in inverted commas, around the mid-90s is well known about Dennis Rodman. There's not a whole pile new that we could have been told over the course of the last 2 episodes. And I think the same goes for the Detroit Pistons. I'm not sure if I'm stepping out of line by saying that. Like, I'm sure we've seen the Bad Boys 30 for 30. It's not a whole pile in the last 2 episodes that tell us anything new about Isaiah Thomas and Lambeer and Rodman when he was playing for them. Is there anything else that we took from the Detroit Pistons storyline?
I had my hands in the air a little bit for both of these episodes in terms of where's this unseen footage? I mean, what are we seeing here? Like, I was a little disappointed, if I'm honest, guys. Like, I think that they probably explained it a little bit in that Dennis waves them off a lot in that unseen footage. He's forever gone, I'm not talking, no comment. Go on, move along. And maybe that's why, but what have we seen in terms of this unseen footage? If they had unseen footage from the Pistons time, now that really would have been something. But instead, we saw people getting on planes. We saw Scott Burrell being told that he's an alcoholic. I mean, I didn't see any, like this footage was the justification for making this series. We saw about 3 minutes in each episode. And yeah, you're right. And again, the Detroit thing, it's been covered. So unless you're adding something new, it's hard to see the justification for it. That said, anytime they do a montage of Jordan scoring 50 points, I drop the pen and I'm like, this is great. I'll watch this all day.
Oh, 100%. Like, we're not, like, I don't think anybody here is for 1 second suggesting this is badly produced or is not enjoyable. It's like, as a piece of journalism, what are we actually learning? Like, I'm not sure if you're going to disagree with that, Kieran, or what do you reckon?
I am really, because I think most of the unseen footage is going to come at the end of the documentary. I think they're trying to, this is called The Last Dance, and yeah, we all have a good insight into basketball people, but after all, it's going to be on Netflix. You know, people that might tune into this mightn't, you know, I didn't have a clue about how many tigers people kept in a cage until I watched that bullshit, The Tiger King. Do you know what I mean? So there could be people that sit on and say, you know, Michael Jordan, I've heard of this guy before, I might watch this. You can't turn on Michael Jordan and watch the 98, 97 season with a load of footage and get a real story. You have to get the background. You have to get his struggles against Detroit. You have to get how hard it was for him as a rookie, how the pain barriers he went through. You know, little interesting things about when they last, you know, in the 89 series, how they, you know, went straight to the weight room. I like that. The montage you're talking about, I think Kieran Shannon, who wrote my book, is a big Prince man, and Party Man came on last night and Jarlath was killing in it, like, and it was one of the best. I thought it was one of the best of the night. But I also liked the Jordan rules. You know, we all heard about the Jordan rules, and it was all like just slam Jordan to the ground, you know, which is what my variation of the Jordan rules was. But, you know, the way the assistant coach kind of explained it, you know, it made more sense, and how they were able to enforce as much pain as they were on Jordan, forced him to the middle when he's at the wing. So when you're going out guarding the wing, he's not going baseline because he was pretty unstoppable going baseline. When he's at the top, force him left. They're all little triggers that all the other guys, especially the big guys that are at the back of the defense, are going, he's at the top, I need to get in a position now because they're going to force him left. So if he beats him left, I need to be there to help or smash him, which is what they were pretty good at. You know, and the trap coming from high when it went into the post, no baseline allowed. And I like the way they said, well, what happened if he did go baseline? And they said, well, Lambeer or Mulhern will get him. So it's, you know, I liked a bit of insight into that side of things. But, you know, it was the Doug Collins bit was nice too. I always remember watching Doug Collins, you know, not knowing too much about that era really. And I felt I know a lot more about it after watching the documentary from last night. Just, you know, how Jerry Krause manoeuvred Doug Collins out in the end, how he was really good for the Bulls and how the Bulls liked him, but felt
Eastern
they could only
Conference
take him so
Finals.
far.
I mean, that happened at Toronto. They lost their coach a couple of seasons ago. A guy who got them to the Eastern Conference Finals, and that was seen as huge. Like, what does a coach have to do in the modern NBA other than get to a conference finals, be a couple of games away from the finals? I thought they'd glossed over that a little bit. Like, I would have liked it. Not like Doug Collins was very like, oh, I sensed the end was coming, but like that had to be big, and maybe that showed us a little bit of Phil that they didn't want us seeing. Maybe that was just something that they thought, well, we can do without that. I felt like there was a decision there. Because
why do you think so,
Doug was doing great. But then I guess they did, in the sense that clearly it came from Krause. Krause is like, look at these two teaming up. They're dismissing Tex Winter, one of the best basketball guys I've ever met in my life. And obviously, as we said at the start, that Krause actually had the light bulb to go, let's get this dude out of here. He's taken as far as he can go with a one-on-one ball. Let's give the triangle a chance.
Well, if we spoke a lot about him last week, but I think the Krause-o-meter in this week's edition is certainly tipping more towards green than it is red. I think he's actually come out of this as a winner this week.
We even saw him dancing.
Oh, amazing.
He did the running man.
and like, it was the one time I thought they'd just leave him have his moment, and Scotty still had to have a dig at the end, kind of going, that's okay, just at the very last second, I was like, oh, they're all getting along great. And then Scotty had to have the dig at the last second. And that was what, 1990?
It was.
They said that like every team has to overcome a team. For Liverpool, it's definitely been Man City, and that we have Man City, and they're kind of financially doped team to blame for the dominance of Liverpool. Essentially, we have the Pistons to blame and to thank for the Bulls getting to where they got to being a three-peat team. Because if you look at it, they didn't come that, they could have beaten them. They went 7 games with them there. I mean, if you think about it, that would have been 7 titles. And
they missed Scotty. Like, Scotty was gone Scotty had the migraine. Like, don't tell me they lost by 20. Scotty's probably getting you 20 in that game. So, he was an incredible loss for them in that game 7. And yeah, you're right. Maybe it could have been 7. Yeah. It's there was so much going on at that time. Even, I think Rodman had a line where he said, life is hard and basketball is easy. So you could tell what was going on a lot with this team at different stages. There was so much going on outside of it, and that's just Jordan alone. Like, Jordan alone is going to just cause you so much. The buses are always, you can't get onto your bus without being people taking your picture, and it's just a circus that comes with Jordan. And
with that, Kieran, right? With that, there's a school of thought, right, that believes that balloon that was growing of MJ's the greatest player in the world, and the narrative of look at these brutes, this horrible basketball that they're playing. Dublin in the 90s versus Kildare is how I would describe it as a Kildare man. They can't beat you with skill, but they can fucking whack you out of it. I mean,
who was the Michael Jordan 90s Kildare?
Glenn Ryan, without a shadow of a doubt. Nuxer, one or the other.
Nuxer. Nice, Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, there was a narrative that was fed there, and there's a belief among, imagine, people in Detroit that, and it's in the Lazenby book, that the Bulls then sent tapes to the NBA of how these Jordan rules were being applied, and how the NBA had to make a decision of, well, how do you want the game to progress? And that if the game was officiated the exact same way as it was during that Game 7 loss the following year, that this wouldn't have happened, and that this title wouldn't have happened in 91, and the roller coaster wouldn't have begun, because they mentioned it, there was no protection of Mike. There's no protection of him going on, and that's why once you tell me if you agree with this, but there is a certain move, along with all of that thing that you described, Kieran, of the madness that surrounds Mike as the celebrity grew, that the referees knew that for viewers to want to watch this, we can't have Michael Jordan getting fouled in the lane. We have to have Michael Jordan dunking on somebody's head. And in many ways, we've seen it play out over the next 30 years that NBA entertainment is the name of the game. It's why the game is so high scoring now. We have to figure out a way of letting Steph hit 7 threes.
What about Steph and LeBron and these guys? What about them trying to go to the basket against the Pistons? Like Jordan's durability is actually scary, because Rodman and these guys and Lambier and these guys were saying last night, like, how was this guy finishing off the season? How was he getting through these? Like, we were trying to kill him when he was going to the basket. Like, guys are going to the basket now. Like, I've gone to the basket out in the Castle Island Blitz against Morris Casey, and I'm kind of like, he's coming. This is going to be sore. You know, that does affect what you're doing around the basket. Jordan's gone to the basket for 2 years against the Pistons, and I agree with you in a way, Jarlath, about they wanted to see Jordan dunking it and all that. But I think 50% of it was that. And I think the other 50% of it is we can't have our marquee team winning this way. We you know, whoever about Jordan or Magic or Larry or whoever we have to protect going forward, we can't have our marquee team, our team that wins it back to back, playing this type of basketball and with these type of antics. And like they get their antics overshadowed how good the Pistons were and how hard Michael and Scotty and Horace Grant and these guys had to work to beat him. These guys had Isaiah Thomas who put up 29 points on one ankle.
They didn't show Isaiah Thomas hit one shot. They didn't show him dribble. They didn't show his brilliance. Nothing.
Yeah, himself and Dumars. Mark Aguirre was, you know, up there with the best 3 men in the league at the time. And then they'd 5 or 6 guys who could play the 4 and 5 that would just break you up. But like, you know, they Adrian Dantley before that. They were a serious squad, that Piston squad. And I think the bad boys, I think we overlook how good they were, you know, as a team. And like, you know, and you know, the other thing as well, looking back on it last night, how great were the rivalries?
Yeah.
Like, you know, you had the Celtics first, then you had the Pistons. The Celtics walked off and the Pistons, and the Pistons walked off and the Bulls. And, you know, everybody had to wait their turn. There was no kind of, I'll sign for a year and jump ship and go with this team and team up with this guy and go with this. He's my buddy, I'll go sign with him. It was, this is your team. You got to figure out a way to make it work, and you got to go beat these boys. You can't just up and leave somewhere. So, well, I know you.
What did you make of the walk-off, lads? What did you? Because the walk-off is probably one of the defining moments in 90s basketball for the ripple effects that it had on the Dream Team selection, and you know, the legend of Isaiah Thomas being a prick for the rest of his days, and that team going out with the tail between their legs. What did you make of it? I'm interested to see what your view was as to how it was portrayed in this.
I thought that was a really good editorial decision from a directorial point of view, where they showed Michael the clip of Isaiah explaining his perspective on it, and he was basically saying, "Nah, I don't want to hear it. I know what he's going to say." And Isaiah Thomas, to what you lads are saying, like the mystique or whatever the opposite of that is around this Pistons team, is it affects Isaiah more than anybody else, because the Dream Team thing came right after that, the walk-off, which wasn't his idea, and yet he gets blamed for that too. And I think, like, this is the guy who, he knocked Larry Bird off, he knocked Magic Johnson off, he knocked Michael Jordan off in a row, all in their prime. Nobody did that apart from these guys. And you talk about what Michael Jordan would be like in 2020. This guy was 6'1" listed, but I think he says himself he was more like 5'11". And like nowadays, if he was a couple of inches taller, I think we're watching a different documentary, because he was an absolute genius. And I think, as the lad said, there wasn't any clip shown of how great he was. I know it's not a Pistons documentary, of course, but I think it's kind of just an outcome of consequence that they came after these legendary Celtics, Lakers teams, and then preceded the greatest team of all time. You know, people say they're underrated, but they're just fourth out of those 4 unbelievable teams, and that's the way of the world, unfortunately.
Jordan is saying about Isaiah Thomas, there's no way you can convince me that he wasn't an asshole, is a great line. But the killer line is Horace Grant referring to the Detroit Pistons as straight up bitches, is probably the best way to describe it. And then the last thing I want to just touch on before we take a quick break is kind of touching on your point about Michael Jordan being the poster boy of the NBA and how the rules would be altered a little bit just to ensure that he was going to thrive. I think John Sally is sensational in episode 3 of this. The blueprint was Magic, Larry, and then Michael. Like, it just really did. The only person pointing out here that this was carved in a way that Michael Jordan was always going to be the protagonist of the NBA. We might get back into that in just a moment, because I do want to chat a little bit about the 1991 NBA Finals, about Magic. Let's talk a little bit about Larry Bird as well, because we've got the Dream Team episode coming next week, and I want to chat a little bit about 90s basketball as a whole. Back in a sec. Okay, you're welcome back. I want to talk about the 1991 NBA Finals, lads. This was something that I was really excited to see, just to see Magic go up against Jordan. Last week we saw that incredible montage of the 63-point game against Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics. Personally, I just love seeing Jordan go up against these all-time legends and the predecessors to the greatest current player thrown at that time. And it's interesting how appreciative Jordan is of all of this. And I think at the end of episode 4, we get to see him voice that, where he's like, I can now sit in the same company as Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, and how much he actually appreciates that title and how much 1991 meant to him. Like, we don't get access to this in many other sports, do we? The locker room scene after an NBA Finals. It is just raw emotion. And the first time perhaps a lot of people had seen that from Jordan in 91. So, Jarlath, we might start with you on that. The 1991 Finals, did it evoke kind of the same sense of wonder on your front?
I really feel like, I think I said it last week as well, that I wasn't as clued in at that time. I was the only young fella, so I didn't. But the first title I remember him winning was against Portland, and that was only because of all the hype that surrounded the Dream Team. The footage of him with the trophy, I think, is among the most, crying with the trophy is among the most used clip. I think for that reason that Will Perdue mentioned, that all we saw was anger, upsetment, this drive to win, and he brought up the question of whether he had feelings, whether he actually had feelings, or if he was a sociopath, to then see the relief. And I'm sure Kieran can speak to this way better than I can, but any sports people I speak to and I ask about winning, all they ever talk about is the relief, is the valve being completely let off. And there's this tiny window where you're not thinking about, and now we go again. And they captured it. They really captured it. And in all its glory there, they only have the photo of him crying with Magic. But I thought it was a really, really kind of touching telling of exactly how he had taken every sling and arrow they had and could now breathe out.
Kieran, what do you reckon?
Yeah, look, I think there would have been obviously a small bit of a fear on Jordan's part after the 3 years, or the 2 years in particular, hard years. And we didn't touch on the Cavs as well, and the Cavs were good. And I like the little insight they gave us into the whole bit of the Cavs stuff as well before the Pistons, obviously. But when you lose like they did to the Pistons twice, and then you get your chance and you beat them, and you saw them celebrating going back into playing after that Pistons one, and saw Jordan out on the runway in Chicago with the fist up to the crowd, and then you lose game one to this storied franchise, the Los Angeles Lakers, and one of the all-time greats, Magic Johnson. And I know he said he was pretty confident after that. They didn't play well, and they felt like they were fine. And the beauty of a 7-game series, it was lucky it wasn't one game that they had to win it. But I could just tell it was huge relief for him. But it wasn't relief that he'd won one. It was probably a bit of both. It was relief that he'd won his first, and he felt like, okay, I have won now. I've won it. I'm not going to be that guy that was the great scorer, the Dominique Wilkins, who was the highlight player, the great scorer, but never won anything. I'm not going to be that guy. I'm going to be the guy that's got one championship at least. And so I think there was a huge deal of relief in that, but also just the fact that it would have been horrific, I would say, from the effort that they put in that season. So they lose to the Pistons, and straight away they're back in their weight room, all of them. Jordan is adamant, we all need to get stronger, we need to get in better shape. So he set the tone day one. They all did it, they all bought in, they all got bigger, they all got stronger, they were all ready for the Pistons when they came. Then they were knocked off the Pistons, and then you're going to have to come up against the Lakers, who are starting the downward spiral. They weren't what they were, obviously. And yeah, once they switched Pippen onto Magic Johnson, you know, that was it. You could see how much Magic physically was starting to struggle at that time. You know, he didn't have the movement that he had 5 years before that, and
probably had HIV at that time, unbeknownst to himself.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, you could tell. He didn't look himself anyway. He didn't. I know they only showed the clips where he was fumbling about the place, but when you look back at his numbers over that series, he didn't put in. You know, he wasn't Magic Johnson. And to be honest, I think Bird and Magic were very quick, and they were right to be quick to let their status, you know, go to this young kid from Chicago. They knew, look, we're good and we're good at what we do and we've won this minute, but this guy is different level. Like, two of them very quickly said it, you know. Blair, I think it's the 85, 86 season where you know, Magic is kind of like going, oh, Jordan's the most talented player in the game. Like, this is 2 years in the league. This guy is, this isn't 1990 where Magic is realizing that Jordan's the best. So I think by the time 1990 came, I think Jordan was ready, and I think he was going to be hard to beat. But losing that first game at home would have been, you know, there would have been a lot of hard words in the dressing room after that, and they obviously didn't look back. But, you know, relief is huge. You know, I felt it my first year with Kerry, but I was in the door 3 years, so I was dropped off the final in 04, we lost the final in 05, and I was relieved to win it in 06. Jordan was in the league since 84, 85, so he
7-year
had
project,
6 or 7 years. Yeah, 7-year project, and a lot of pain and a lot of soul searching, and so you can tell. And he became better. He became better after that one. The monkey was off his back. Now he could just know all that kind of bullshit that people were saying. Oh, he's not a leader. He's only a scoring champion, and like he put all that shit to bed, and then he was able to kind of show for the next 5 or 6 years just how good he actually, you know, to build on his legacy almost.
Ronan, you earlier on brought up the story of the cigars and Dennis Rodman going to Jordan's room. There's a quote right after that where Jordan says, Dennis leaves me out there by myself because Pippen's not playing at that moment. And I know this is at the entirely different end of the 2 episodes we've watched to the 1991 NBA Finals. But it kind of comes full circle for me in this, because we have John Paxson hitting a couple of game winners, basically. He goes full clutch Paxson at this moment against the LA Lakers. There is trust placed in somebody that is not Dennis Rodman or Scottie Pippen, and I think this is mentioned quite a bit with talking heads involved. Whereas earlier in the 2 episodes, as I say, there was this sense that Jordan was really trying to forward the idea that we were a 3-man team. Everybody outside of that was clearly inferior, and we were the 3 musketeers that would drive this whole thing forward. So I'm not sure where you lie in that, Ronan, as to what his actual view on that is. He clearly has respect for his teammates, but I suspect that he just sees the 3 boys as a level above everybody else.
Yeah, and it went from him being initially annoyed about Phil Jackson taking over from Doug Collins, because they obviously had a kinship with Doug Collins, who was a number 1 overall pick himself, knew what Michael Jordan was going through, being the most talented player, and Jordan wanted the ball in his hands. But as you said, he matured out of that. He wanted whoever was in the best place to take the shot. Sometimes that was him. Sometimes it was someone else. Paxson, obviously Steve Kerr in a few years' time. So I thought that was interesting. And obviously Kieran mentioned the Cavaliers game, and all anyone ever talks about is the shot from that game. But I thought we got some real insight into him going over to the beat reporters before the final game and saying, I proved you wrong, now I'm going to prove you wrong. And it just shows like this stupid thing that sports people say, that they don't pay attention to the media, when it's basically impossible. Either you're reading it or someone's telling you about it. So Jordan knew one way or another, and he went over and told them in no uncertain terms. And that Cavaliers game, Ron Harper with the ultimate heat check in this series so far. I think this is his only appearance in the 4 episodes, is it? Ron Harper comes in. He comes in for about 15 seconds. He says, I wanted to guard MJ on that shot, and they gave it to Craig Elo, and I was like, oh, whatever. And that was it. That was his whole contribution. And then straight away, Elo bottled the job. And Harper, I think he would have backed himself, as we saw when he got to the Bulls. This was a guy who was like, I know he probably didn't think he was as good as Michael Jordan, but he had the confidence of someone of that ability, and he would have backed himself to shut Jordan down there.
Just to give the exact Harper line, when he was asked to not guard Michael Jordan, he said, yeah, whatever, fuck that bullshit. And that's it. That is in and out from Harper during the entire season. It's brilliant.
It was a crazy move, though. Like you've got two guys here. You've got Ron Harper, who's, who even when, like, how many years later, maybe 5 years, 6 years later, is playing with Jordan, and he's still a really good defender. Then this is Ron Harper when he's 24, 25. He's an absolute ball-hawking defender. Same height as Jordan, same build as Jordan, more athletic than Craig Elo. It's amazing. It's amazing how, I don't know what was going on there, especially when a guy comes up to you and says, I want to take him. And you look at this guy who's 6'6", long, athletic, you go, okay, there you go, you take him, but
I just hope that's his only contribution. I just hope that's his only contribution. Talk about a one and done, best supporting character ever. But he's a guy you don't hear much of, so I think I'm hoping to hear loads more of him going forward, because I love the way he's just great. So blunt. Like that's what we want out of this, really, is these guys coming. We've heard the Jordans and the Rodmans and the Pippins, but I think these guys could be the making of this 98, 97 season when they get past building the story up to it. Yeah, and editorially, again, I thought it was really good the way they closed out episode 4, where you have the juxtaposition of, finally, the Holy Grail, we've won our first championship, to almost like the lethargy of, we know it's coming to an end and you can see it falling apart. There's a bit of fraying going on. So I thought the director did a really good job there as well. Sort of, it's teed it up.
So that definitely, Ronan, that definitely goes into the category of unanswered questions. Like, why put Craig Elo on Jordan in that situation? That is one. I would put forward that another great unanswered question of both of these episodes is, what the fuck was Luke Longley wearing on his feet in that opening chat with Rodman? I don't know if you saw it. Luke Longley's walking along behind them, and he seems to have, like, not just, novelty slippers on. These are like full-on inflated pillows attached to his feet. I don't know what that was. Am I the only one who saw that, first of all? And the second question that was unanswered was, what did Rodman have against Louisiana? Remember that kid gets given the runners after signing the autographs, and someone says, "Why don't you come down to Louisiana?"
No, it's Nashville.
Like, no,
it's Nashville.
Nashville.
He's like, "No, I'm not doing that."
What happened in Nashville?
I would say a racial abuse, probably. I would say
probably, yeah.
The way his tone was kind of like, oh yeah, no, I've been there before. I ain't going back. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Does anybody else see the Longley shoes though?
No,
what about? Go on, Ronan.
No, I didn't see them. So that's my first thing after this.
Go back
and check those out. Yeah.
What about BJ Armstrong's shirt? BJ Armstrong's shirt is the loser of this episode so far. Like, it was a complete travesty, to be honest with you.
So, Owen, we need to start up as part of this podcast for the listeners to send in their most memorable fashion moments from each episode of The Last Dance, because there's a few. Like, I honestly am a collector. I realize that now, and I will try and hunt out on eBay most of the unusual items that I remember from the time that are usually pretty beat up and available from vintage stores. One thing that I've always been fascinated with were these absolutely like vomit-inducing trousers that they used to wear to practice. Now, I'll pull them up and I'll post them in a tweet. Yeah. But there's an awful lot of questionable decisions, some of which are now fashionable again. Like DJ's shirt, I was like, I'd wear that shirt. Put a cardigan over the top of that.
Oh, stop for you. He pulled it off the kitchen table and he put a few buttons on it. Jesus Christ.
There's a lot of questions to do with those fashion choices, I think it's fair to say. And like I'm by no means a fashion expert here whatsoever. My theory is that 90s fashion was so much better from the waist up than the waist down. Is that a generalization, or am I correct in that? trousers were shite. The training tops are nice.
Yeah,
the
I
players
guess
could
the
wear what they
pants
want.
are always
Really,
going to change.
True.
Go on, yeah, the players will wear whatever they like.
They wear whatever, and you know what? They were cool. I don't care whether they even know they still look cool. Scotty's walking through with his suit. It's about 4 times too big for him. He's like the coolest guy. He's like Conor McGregor. He's kind of walking through. Some guy goes, "Hey, Scotty, I idolize you." Scotty doesn't even make eye contact with him. He just has the strut on. Like these guys were walking on air come 97, 98. Like stop it. They could wear a clown's outfit and get away with it.
I'm immediately looking forward to the John Paxson follow-up documentary, because I'm sure you'll have all spotted he actually had a camcorder himself on the plane. When we're seeing this footage being dug out 22 years later, John Paxson is there with his video camera, and then there's some comment made about what the actual film guy who's filming the documentary is getting paid. So I want to see John Paxson's camcorder footage, no question about that.
I don't think that's going to emerge, because there's footage of do you remember the dunk contest with Vince Carter doing that 360 windmill?
Oh, yeah.
And Shaq on the sideline with his mouth on the floor, and he's holding a camcorder, and the footage has never emerged. Every year he gets asked, "What did you do with it?" I don't know, just pretending to film it or what, or it's in his private collection. But yeah, was it John Paxson or Bill Wellington who had the camcorder?
Bill Wellington.
Oh shit, it was Bill Wellington. Sorry, my bad. Sorry,
yeah.
It's Wellington. You're right. And yeah, I would pay big money to see that. And the other question I had, as you've already mentioned, is what happened in Nashville with Dennis Rodman. This whole thing has also completely moved Phil Jackson up in my power rankings of people I would invite to my dream dinner party. Am I out on my own there? Like, is it a? Are you into
the acid?
I want to hear more about him feeling he's a lion while on acid. This is the dinner party we need to have.
Well, I just looked it up here. Bill Wellington is on Twitter. He's got 30,000 followers. So it'd be quite easy if everyone who listens to this tweets him, or at least follows him and tries to get that footage off him. I'd reckon that Phil would be pretty guarded over dinner. The person you want is Scott Burrell. You really want Scott Burrell, because I heard a rumor that this is something that they pinpointed in this. Scott Burrell is the outsider to begin with, but by the end, Mike fucking loves him. He's an absolute, friend for life.
Yeah, that's actually probably a good shout. Now that I think of it, maybe there's just like a little bit of a tease with Jackson in this, where he like drops the Lion story, and I'm like, that's amazing. I can't wait to hear more about this. And the Puerto Rico thing is amazing as well. And I'm like, okay, that's our Phil Jackson fix. That's the whole thing about this entire 10-part series. Is that in a weird way we're going to be left wanting more from every single...
Oh, we are.
I now think the Bad Boys thing is being exercised. I think that was probably the only thing that went beyond saturation point during this. But Jackson, Rodman, I know you're not the biggest fan of the Rodman narrative, Jarlath, but for me, definitely Rodman I could have done with a bit more of. And I think once we get through all the different characters over 10 episodes, we'll all be thinking to ourselves, God, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that guy, for example.
Well, I think it is going to pave the way for more of these long-form basketball documentaries. And this week there was a lot of talk about Kobe filming the last 2 years of his career. He had a full-on 4K camera crew and sound guy with him at all times for the last 2 years of his career, to the point where he was, staging scenes. There's someone brought this up on the Ringers NBA podcast, that they were at a Laker game and Kobe's crew came on court during a timeout to film him speaking to a referee. So there's obviously a treasure trove of footage there. And, I'd imagine with the year anniversary, that'll be the next big one of these. Now that this one has kind of proven that there's a massive appetite for this.
Absolutely. Lads, we're almost out of time. Is there any final takeaways that we have, or anything that we're most looking forward to about next week? I see you've also got Dream Team on your bookshelf there, Jarlath. So next week is going to fill into quite nicely with Jack McCallum's great book.
Yeah, that's going to be big. I don't know, lads, you tell me, but the Dream Team was the one that it just completely captured the imagination of the world. I mean, it changed basketball, and it changed the entire axis on which the world spun in terms of sports. It changed the Olympics, and as we know, and as you mentioned, Eoin, the interaction between Tony Kukoc and Scotty, and their attempt to humiliate him on the global stage is going to be an amazing story to tell with Tony's input.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Kieran, one last question: Who really are the bad boys? The Detroit Pistons or the Tyrone team of the 2000s? That's the only parallel I could draw.
There wouldn't be much into you could throw them all into a room. There'd be a good scrap, I'd say. Although I fancy Lambier and Mulhern at 7 foot just to come out on top of Gormley and Ryan McManaman, but it wouldn't stop them. It wouldn't stop them having an out. But no, they were. They're a story team. Phil Jackson, that 20 years coaching, no losing season, was a nice line right near the end of the documentary. I was kind of like going, obviously he had huge success with the Lakers and the Bulls, but I like the way, and I read bits and pieces of books about him. I like the way he just goes about it. He is a narrative and very much sees, everybody as individual and handles everybody a bit different. And it's refreshing to see that, because I think more so now it's more kind of like we all have to do it this way. Everybody has to do it the one way. There's no space for people to be a bit different within a setup. But I think Jackson, the way he handled a lot of egos and characters throughout all that, both the Lakers and his Bulls team, he did a remarkable job, really.
Did the Tex Winter Phil Jackson triangle offense permeate Irish basketball? I presume everyone started doing it eventually.
I never did it anyway, because I'd never done it. I actually enjoyed that bit of it last night with seeing it from overhead and the 33 different variations of it. And it has to be an unbelievable offense for Jordan to go and actually say, here, somebody else have the ball and I'll go down into the block and I'll set a screen and free up someone, I'll spin, see if I'm open. And I thought that was very interesting, but
it only works in a man-to-man defense. It doesn't work if somebody sets up a zone, and you could play zone in Ireland and still can, right?
Yeah, that's true.
You can, yeah. But still, teams play a lot of man-to-man as well. Maybe teams have run ripples out of it, but I don't ever.
It's be ridiculously hard to play it. I mean, there's
a lot of reads in it. It's an offense. It's set up. It gives you a platform of ways guys can go, but it's actually, and we did a bit of it over the last 2 years with Pat Price. So my first 2 years with the Warriors, when we came back with Mark Burnson, very regimental, come down, call the play, run that play. The guy's going to get it in the block. You give it into him and he goes to work, and that's the play. We'll come down, we'll run another play. And whereas, with the triangle and with some of the stuff that we've done over the last 2 years with Pat, a lot of it was reads. If you took 2 dribbles, a guy could go back door. You knew it, he knew it. If it was on, it was happening. But I would say that's very much what the triangle is. There's a set motion of it, but everything is reads. If a guy cuts back door, somebody's got to fill his space. Somebody comes across from the top. But you're right.
Need 5 smart guys there.
And they said that about Rodman. They said when Rodman came in, the Rodman came in, and all of a sudden you're going the guys had been doing the triangle for 4 or 5 years at the stage Dennis came in. But one thing that Jordan and kind of, he said, it's smart players get this and get the reads of it. And Rodman got it very quickly, which showed you how intelligent Rodman was. And, the triangle offense was something that was huge. And you said it earlier on about it. It's another win for Jerry Krause in this. And I know by the time 97 came, all that happened here was Jordan went to Ger and Eoin, or put it to Ger and Eoin's off. It's me or Phil, or it's Jerry Krause. That's really the fulcrum of what happened in 97, 98. That's it in as basic as you could put it. And unfortunately, I think for Ger and Eoin's off, he went with Jerry Krause because he believed Jerry Krause could build this all up again for the third time. Whereas, but him spotting Phil Jackson and Tex Winter talking all the time and at chalkboards and talking and figuring it out, you could tell he was like, this is the way forward with these two. And look, it was, and not only did it work for the Bulls, but it worked when he went to the Lakers with Kobe and all that as well. So it's obviously something that's a very good question on, are more teams doing it? It might be a good one to put out there on the social media to see if there's clubs in Ireland using it or have used it. But I never remember coach telling me they're running the triangle, and I never remember coach telling me this is how we're going to run the triangle anyway. So
sure, I'm just curious because it seemed complicated. Like I said, it took them a full year to master it in the first place. So perhaps only like I was just thinking, your teams and the very top level of basketballers in Ireland would have done it. Like nobody would try it at underage, which is most of our familiarization with actually playing the game.
You could get it. You could get it. You just you probably need a Jordan or a Pippen for it to be as effective as it is.
Yeah,
and maybe not too many people have a Jordan or a Kobe Bryant. Sorry, and Phil's both. All Phil's rings came with those guys, and the triangle.
Can I ask you a question, Kieran?
Yes.
Who was in your playing career in Irish basketball? Who was the closest player that came to a Michael Jordan situation of, well, look, lads, he's going to score what he's going to score. That guy is absolutely unstoppable. Let's just focus on letting him get his, and we'll try and control everybody else.
It was for me. It was Ricardo Leonard. I came a tiny bit after. I saw Laverne Evans and Terry Strickland and all these guys, but they were guys that were just missed out in the NBA, and this Europe thing was very new, and Ireland was the first port to call, and we ended up getting Mario Ellie and all these guys that were NBA talents playing in Neptune Stadium and all this. But for me, Ricardo Leonard, when he came to Tralee, he was putting up 50 points a game. He was signing so many autographs afterwards that the following home game, he got baseball cards sent from Old Dominion from his college. And he came up with a genius plan that I'm going to hand out these baseball cards to all these kids and they're going to be delighted. What he didn't factor in was that Irish kids didn't know what baseball cards was. They took the baseball cards off him and then they gave it back to him with a pen and said, sign it. So he made double the work for himself. But offensively wise, he was 6'7". He was an unbelievable shooter. He had huge hands. He could pass out of the lane. He was explosive when he first came out of college, as in he was dunking everything. And he was a guy like that you just looked at and goes, and he could have played like he marked. He beat Alonzo Mourning in a big game, and beat him well on the stats and the team score when he was in college, and probably could have made it to the NBA. Maybe work ethic maybe gotten his way. I'm not sure, but when he came to Ireland, he was a hero in Tralee. Still a good friend of mine. But I've often heard that this guy could have played in the NBA. So he's the best that I would have seen a lot of that I could make an honest assessment of.
Right, very interesting. There's another podcast.
His young fella has just signed. His young fella Ryan has just signed. He played with us the first year we won the Champions Trophy with the Tralee Warriors. He went to high school in America, and now he's just signed with a college. So,
which college?
Yeah, Northern Illinois.
Right. Is he on a similarly prodigious path?
He's really dynamic. He's six. Right. He's a guy that when he went out there, I said, Ryan, just be hungry for work. If you're hungry for work, like you've got the athletic ability. If you work and learn and you play for 25 hours a week for 4 years in college, you don't know what the limit is for you. So I'm watching these highlight tapes at the end of each of these seasons in the high school, and Jesus, I can see him growing into himself. He was a kid when he was playing with me. He was only 17, but he was still starting on a Super League team that went to the Final Four and won it. So he could carry on that lineage, and it's exciting that we've another guy out there.
Just a name to look out for, to say the very least, by the sounds of things. Lads, Kieran, Ronan, Jarlath, thanks a million. Remember, tweet us with your merchandise, good-looking clothes, bad-looking clothes. Probably the bad-looking clothes is what we want to see in the 1990s. I'm sure Jarlath will be pushing all his clothes as well on social media. Make sure to join us next week here on Off the Bull. We've got the Dream Team, and we've got Jordan becoming a commercial behemoth next week. Both very, very interesting subjects. Lads, thanks a million. Chat to you next week.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Off the ball. Oh,